the cosmic cold, the bottomless depths where worlds are born and die in the radiance of supernovas, and eternity flows through galactic nebulae. From this infinity they arose, the absolute beings, the architects of realities, whose forms shimmered like distant stars, and whose hands forged countless universes. They lived by creating and devouring. Their existence was an endless cycle of creation and destruction, a desire to embrace eternity itself. Under their power, matter, spirits, and laws were born, but even for the Absolute, this grandiose game became a prison, the shackles of inevitable slavery. And then, fed up with this meaningless existence, he decided to create a different entertainment for himself, a game that would change everything. A chessboard the size of the universe, where each fragment of stone is a fallen world, and the pieces are those who decide their fates. Move after move, battle after battle, and only crumbling debris testified to the furious, merciless war that unfolded between their creations. One of them, the one who wielded the shadow, fell, pierced by the blades of his own soldiers, a victim of the game his creator had started. The rest gathered, their ominous silhouettes against the starry canopy, to watch over a world left without its master, a world now an empty throne. The death of a comrade, killed by those he had called to life, marked the beginning of a new act in this bloody drama. But even the fallen Shadow King left something behind, a power that did not disappear, but merely awaited a new owner. This lost power, wandering in the darkness, became a bait for those who thirsted for power, a target for those who survived. The King's shadow rose again, ready to accept the challenge, to re-enter the game, but with a new master, with a new destiny. And, far from the space wars, under the clear sky of the ordinary world, life went on as usual, hiding the echoes of ancient battles beneath the surface. An ordinary young man sat in the school corridor, his gaze full of mischief and confidence, foreshadowing only ordinary, earthly adventures. Gossip, worries, minor dramas, that's what filled this world, a world that was not yet aware of the coming upheavals. Bitter insults and ridicule are a daily occurrence within school walls, where everyone fights for their place in the sun for their own small victory. Tension hangs in the air as the young man faces hostility from his peers, injustice and prejudice. Again, a familiar face, a familiar threat, another confrontation that seems endless, repeating itself day after day. The two eyes meet, and in this silent duel is reflected all the unspoken rage and hidden strength that is yet to be revealed. In the everyday bustle of the school corridors, conflict is brewing again, and anxious whispers are spreading among the students. Park Kyung-hae, clutching her hands to her face, and Sunjin, trying to calm her down, unwittingly become witnesses to yet another injustice. But this time, Song Jin-woo's gaze, which usually concealed deep emotions, became especially sharp, as if something new was awakening within his soul. The brazen Song Soo-ho, with his red hair and fiery gaze, rushes forward, driven by blind aggression. However, his blow is met with a lightning-fast, crushing response, and the air around him thickens with the unexpectedly released force. Song Soo-ho's body is thrown aside, leaving behind only the echo of rustling and destruction. Sung Jin-woo's eyes glow with silent reproach, his presence growing heavier, foreshadowing something more than just a school fight. A piercing blue gaze that reveals depths of determination and hidden power that can change everything. In the blink of an eye, Song Jin-woo strikes again, his foot cutting through the air with incredible speed. But Song Soo-ho only grins madly through his broken nose, his eyes revealing not pain but a sinister pleasure. Song Jin-woo's fist erupts into blue flames, gathering pure energy within itself, ready to tear apart his opponent. "It doesn't hurt me at all," comes from Song Soo-ho, whose eyes now glow an ominous red, reflecting an unknown power. Another, even more powerful blow hits Song Soo-ho, shaking the space as Yoo Jin-ho watches in horror from the sidelines. It seemed like this power should have broken anyone, but soon Soo-ho only glided across the floor like an invulnerable phantom. The first sign of doubt, mixed with shock, flashed across Song Jin-woo's face, for he felt that this was no ordinary person. A scream of horror escapes the lips of Park Kyung-hee and Sun Jin, who realize that they have witnessed something truly supernatural. Song Soo-ho stands on his feet, shrouded in a light haze, his posture calm, but there is an inexplicable threat in the air. And here it is, proof of inhuman power, a broken-through steel cabinet door, a symbol of destructive force. "Huh!" Song Soo-ho blurts out in confusion as a blue aura envelops him, revealing his own dormant potential. Song Jin-woo, kneeling on one knee, looks at his opponent, his dilated pupils reflecting shock and an ominous premonition of the coming battle. Against the backdrop of a serene cityscape where skyscrapers touch the sky and the sun caresses the rooftops, everyday life is in full swing. Amidst this maelstrom of worldly worries, we meet Song Soo-ho, an ordinary second-year student whose days are filled with lectures and mundane activities. Step by step, he walks through the streets, his gait seeming as inconspicuous as the shadows that fall from the trees on the sidewalk. There is a pensiveness in his gaze, a slight melancholy, perhaps a premonition of something more than just studying. But even in the quietest corner of the world, the echo of an alien, frightening reality will always find its way, and a voice from a megaphone breaks the silence. The hunters have already entered the gate and begun the cleansing, echoes over the crowd, once again reminding us of the fragile balance between the worlds. In the distance, in the shadows of figures in power, they whisper about deadlines, about 8 hours that mark the time until return. This is a R-rank gate, so they should be back soon. Words meant to be reassuring, but only serve to underscore the constant threat. The hunters will sort it out, some say with indifference, while others anxiously ask, perhaps the university will soon disappear? And at that moment, something cold and alien flashed in Song Soo-ho's eyes, like a reflection of a distant but inevitable fate. Because behind this everyday life lies a world torn apart by portals, where cities are reduced to ruins engulfed in flames, a world where the gates became a passage for monsters that burst out, sowing death and devastation. And so, in response to despair, special people appeared, hunters capable of confronting monsters, the embodiment of the last hope. Their presence is a promise of protection, a mysterious glow that envelops even the most ordinary of them, hinting at their hidden power. Sun Soo-ho holds a pencil, a tool that in his hands can bring images to life, transferring his inner world onto the canvas. Sitting at his easel, he creates, but his thoughts are far away, beyond the boundaries of this peaceful auditorium, where every stroke is an escape or a premonition. He draws, realizing that most people achieve results in small steps, like ants, while some achieve everything without much effort. In such a system of life, these very ants were terribly aware of their insignificance, and Sun Soo-ho was one of them, locked in his despair. But even in the midst of his sadness, someone else seemed to walk through this world with ease and nonchalance, demonstrating his strength and carelessness. He realizes that if the hunters do not cleanse the gates, this world will simply perish. The unawakened cannot survive without the awakened, and the awakened exist on their own. After all, it is only thanks to the efforts of those who risk their lives that ordinary people gain the right to peace and a peaceful existence. But even in this fragile world, disturbing thoughts inevitably appear, shadows of the past that do not let go. Son Jin-woo, deep in thought, returns to his inner torment again. The missing parents, who lost their lives in the crucible of the gate, left a deep wound forever, showing how the right to life can depend on others. He recalls how he once believed that nothing was unattainable, but times changed and the void began to fill with helplessness. His mother often said that he was so much like his father, as if predicting a destiny full of sacrifice and power. And then, in a moment of enlightenment, his eyes flash, reflecting a determination born from the ashes of despair. Yes, he suddenly responds to someone's voice, he's especially focused today. Another remarks, looking at his work. What are you so engrossed in drawing? A voice asks from behind him, to which Son Jin-woo merely shrugs. I was just letting my hand move freely. But a look of concern flashes across his face, because what he's putting on canvas is much more than a simple sketch. On paper, a dark, spiky shadow comes to life, a warrior from a world accessible only to him, the embodiment of his hidden power. Meanwhile, in another corner of the world, a glowing blue light heralds the completion of another mission, attracting the attention of ordinary people. From the depths of the portal, drawn into a vortex of energy, those who fearlessly dived into the unknown depths return. A victorious group of hunters emerges from the gate, radiating confidence and pride in a duty accomplished. You've done a great job, Hunter Kim Cho-soo, their employee greets them. We've successfully cleared the dungeon, and we have something to report to the Hunters Association. However, something more than fatigue flickers in the eyes of Hunter Kim Cho-soo, a slight anxiety, a premonition of something missed. His report describes humanoid monsters with blue flames coming from their mouths and eyes, attacking with claws and teeth but causing only minor damage. It's definitely a new species, not discovered since the gate appeared, he muses with relief, and fortunately, it turns out to be less dangerous. But it is at this moment that the seemingly harmless creature bursts out of the shadows, spewing blue flames, and its true threat is revealed, and a chilling horror distorts the face of one of the hunters, when something invisible but deadly pierces him, calling into question all their self-confidence. The incredible speed and force of the attack shocks those who have not yet had time to comprehend the scale of what is happening. A worker standing nearby recognizes his comrade in the victim with horror, his voice trembling with a premonition of disaster. Meanwhile, the impaled hunter lets out a silent scream as his flesh begins to disintegrate under the influence of the monstrous blue energy. Blood mixes with flashes of electricity as those around shrink at the sight of this horrific transformation. An unknown killer towers over the fallen victim, while in the background, frightened people begin to rush about. Pure, genuine fear can be seen in the wide-open eyes of the witness, who has realized the mortal danger. All that remains of the victim's body is mutilated flesh, consumed by a mystical flame that marks the end. A powerful explosion of energy throws back everyone nearby, turning any attempts at resistance into a chaotic rout. Screams of horror echo through the street as people fall one after another, mercilessly struck down by an invisible enemy. At the same time, outside the building, unsuspecting students continue their daily activities. One of them, a young man, looks up from his work, catching echoes of noise, and looks out the window with alarm. What's going on there? His friends turn around and freeze in shock, seeing the bloody massacre unfolding behind the glass. Outside, the carnage turns into a real nightmare. People writhe in pain, their bodies engulfed in terrible flames. With each passing second, the horror grows, and the students, pressed against the glass, cannot take their eyes off this unbearable picture. Amidst the chaos, one of the surviving guards, desperately clinging to hope, shouts out that they need to wait for the real hunters to arrive. But inside, another man, pale with fear, whispers of his helplessness, realizing that his E rank will not save him. The young man, looking out the window, feels cold sweat running down his temples and his heart constricting with despair. And the monster, once a man, now stands in full power, his head engulfed in an ominous blue fire, signifying victory. Then, with unnatural grace, he drops to one knee, as if preparing for a new, even more terrible act. The earth trembles under its power, and the young man finally finds the strength to shout, "Run! Save yourself before it's too late." The creature's impact falls to the ground, shaking everything around and throwing people back in a wave. One by one they fall, stunned and broken by this furious force. And the monster, its face distorted with rage, once again utters its primal, chilling cry. Fear grips everyone who still breathes, turning them into silent statues of horror. But amidst this general despair, the young man feels only one thing: a call for salvation, for escape. Nearby, one of the girls, her legs refuse to obey, as if rooted in the cursed ground. His gaze meets her pleading eyes for a moment, full of tears and hopelessness. And then, under the pressure of horror and instinct, he decides that it will haunt him until the end of his days. Every step away from her echoes with the burning reproach. What kind of nonsense was that? I just left her to die. Meanwhile, the shadow of the monster looms ever closer, its giant claws ready to close on its victims. At that moment of realization, something new flashes in the young man's eyes, a determination born of bottomless guilt. Pain pierces his body, but now it only spurs him on, becoming a catalyst for an unknown force. He rises, staggering, challenging the very fate that only a moment ago seemed predetermined. The girl's face is distorted by a scream that never quite made it out, tears running down her pale cheeks. The monster's rage grows, and its roar seems capable of tearing the very fabric of reality. It rushes forward, embodying a primal horror that feeds on the fear of the living. The girl's hands reach into the void, desperately seeking support, praying for salvation that does not exist. Every muscle of the monster is tense, every sound of its movement is a harbinger of inevitable retribution. And, again, the young man flies back from the blow, stunned, but still clinging to every shred of life. An icy pain pierces his body as the monster's merciless might descends upon him. His look, full of pain and unbending will, suggests that this battle is not yet lost. But to understand the full depth of his determination, we need to look back to the beginning of his incredible journey. He started out as the weakest, but every monster he defeated, every floor he became stronger, toughened him up. He fought tirelessly, raising his level, asking nothing in return except his own strength. Countless gates fell under his onslaught, opening the way to new, even more dangerous trials. He faced hordes of monsters, their species changed, but his resolve remained unwavering. His shadows grew, his blows became lightning fast, piercing the darkness with the very energy of destruction. Thus he reached the top floor, the edge of the unknown, the place where his true destiny awaited him. There he met Rakon, the embodiment of ancient power, an enemy whose strength he simultaneously despised and respected. But something in that fight, in that absolute power, awakened in him a vague memory, a questioning echo from the past. Something long forgotten flashed in his eyes, as if a crack in time had opened the way to forbidden thoughts. The image of his father, Son Hwa, always strong and reliable, appeared before him, shrouded in the aura of old years. "Dad!" The whisper pierced the silence as his gaze caught on a seemingly ordinary object. But this object was not just part of the background, it was a witness to a desperate, heroic act. Here he is, Son Lh1, rushing into battle with the monster with nothing but a fire extinguisher. Before him was the terrifying face of a monster whose destructive power threatened to devour everything in its path. And again, someone's figure flies back from the blow, just like himself, but with an unwavering spirit. It was his father, who, bleeding, took upon himself all the fury of the monster, trying to protect what was most precious. And then Song Jin-woo realized that his own struggle was a continuation of that long-ago heroic battle. The unbending spirit of his father, who had stood in the face of absolute evil, now pulsed through his own veins. The abyss opened up beneath his feet, and below, in clouds of dust, stood the frozen figures of those he was trying to protect. His gaze, full of intense attention, was directed to the very bottom of this horror. I should have thought of this sooner. The bitter thought pierced him like an icy blade of realization. There he is, Son Jin-woo, standing over the defeated enemy, whose essence dissolves in the glow of violet flame. Nearby is Park, Kyung-yi, her face distorted by a scream, her eyes full of unbearable horror at what is happening. The monster's shattered shell crumbled into a myriad of glowing particles, signifying more than just victory. At that very moment, ghostly windows of the system appeared before Son Jin-woo, offering the unthinkable. The secret quest, Courage of the Powerless, was completed. The right to become a player was granted. All this stunned him to the depths of his soul. An image flashed through his mind. He, Son Jin-woo, clothed in new power, delivering a crushing blow to the shadows. If I can become as strong as I was then, as in that vision, this became his new, burning thirst. Son Jin-woo's face, hidden by the shadows, radiated an implacable, extreme determination. A flash of light, pure and all-encompassing, pierced the space like a seal placed on its fate, and then he heard the universe itself confirm his choice, uttering its invisible yes. Song Jin-woo's eyes lit up with a ghostly blue flame, and a desperate yet victorious smile played on his lips. A new challenge was not long in coming. A gigantic, armored Awakened One appeared before him. Awakened D-ranked Burning Mist. His name and power were carved into the air, heralding a deadly battle. There was panic all around him again, shouts of "Run!" But for Song Jin-woo, time seemed to have sped up, returning to its usual brutal rhythm. 3 opponents, one of which was an awakened monster, stood before him, ready to tear him apart. Every blow, every movement in this dance of death carried the possibility of a fatal mistake. And then Soren Jin-woo realized that he had truly awakened, and his old life was just a distant echo. Song Jin-woo felt a new, unbridled power raging within him, reflected as a blue flame in his eyes. With that power came the realization of its destructive nature, as his blow fell upon his opponent with a furious rage. Each of Song Jin-woo's strikes sent the enemy's body flying limply, illuminated by flashes of his own aura. Deep down, he heard a quiet goodbye, a farewell to the person he once was, to the weakness that was now gone forever. The Awakened One's body crashed into the wall with a thud, but he still clung to life, shrouded in a halo of pain. Even Song Jin-woo was amazed by this power, the one he himself had unleashed, and how easily it crushed everything around him. "Just one blow," the Awakened One whispered, barely able to stay on his feet, his eyes betraying a mixture of shock and disbelief. He landed abruptly, mustering the last of his willpower to respond to this stunning challenge. In the blink of an eye, the Awakened One launched a counterattack, his form blurring in a deadly whirlwind. The enemy's counterattack was swift and precise, forcing Son Jin-woo to use all his newfound instincts. The Awakened One's face twisted into a bestial grimace, his red eyes glowing with a furious lust for battle. In that tense moment, the system calmly notified Son Jin-woo of the completion of the training quest and his level up. With each new level, his gaze became sharper and his determination became more unwavering, foreshadowing the inevitable outcome. Song Jin-woo's next strike was more powerful, more focused than ever, filled with cold fury. The Awakened One flew away again, but the amazing resilience of this D-rank monster continued to shock. The tortured D-rank Burning Mist seemed to have exhausted all its strength, its body beginning to disintegrate. But Son Jin-woo couldn't believe it. Could this Awakened One still be standing after such a series of attacks? Without hesitation, Song Jin-woo delivered another devastating kick, piercing through the enemy. Each blow followed another, turning the battle into a merciless symphony of destruction where the enemy had no chance. And so, with the final, decisive blow, the awakened burning mist was finally defeated. Seong Jinwoo, with indomitable strength, sent his opponent flying. But even in that moment of triumph, the treacherous blow struck home, and the echo of ancient words pierced the mind of the awakened one. The dagger sank deep, and monstrous energy gushed into the open wound. Song Jinwoo cried out, clutching his heart as he felt his own essence begin to change. However, he was not the only one bleeding. The enemy's body also had a gaping wound from the counterattack. Rage awoke in his eyes, for the realization of his own weakness was more bitter than any pain. Then he gathered all the remnants of his will, and his fist once again collided with monstrous force. Every contact was a battle at the limits of his capabilities, a cry from his soul against the growing agony. No longer holding back, he released the full force of his anger, shaking the space around him with bolts of energy. Their bodies were thrown apart, and a destructive wave rolled across the entire space. But even though he was wounded, awakened Burning Mist did not give up, preparing for a new attack. Then Song Jinwoo delivered a crushing blow, breaking through the opponent's final defense. He attacked mercilessly, his blades cutting through the darkness, leaving the enemy no chance to resist. With every movement, his determination only grew stronger, and his mind was clearer than ever despite his mortal fatigue. And now, once again, his fist was filled with power, ready to deliver the final, crushing blow. He brought it down on the enemy, and reality itself shook from this unimaginable power. The Colossus of Darkness began to crumble, its body turning into debris, dissolving into the air. The force of their clash tore apart space, and even the indestructible screens disappeared at the epicenter of the explosion. Shards of glass flew everywhere, echoing the final, death rattle of the defeated enemy. Where the nightmarish battle had just raged, only a gaping crater remained, testifying to Song Jinwoo's complete victory. Seong Jinwoo poured all his fury into a final, crushing blow, cutting through the darkness with a shining blade. His eyes burned brighter than ever, reflecting the power that was bursting out, ready to devour everything in its path. Each of his attacks was charged with frantic energy. Each blow shook the universe itself, destroying the shackles of reality. He pushed off from the ground, soaring upward through the thundering debris like a meteor rushing towards its victim. And so, the final blow fell upon the enemy, splitting his essence and scattering fragments in all directions. Underfoot, only a giant crater remained, a witness to the unimaginable force that shook the very earth. Song Jinwoo was breathing heavily, exhausted, but his glowing eyes already showed the anticipation of absolute victory. His fist, bloody and shining, clenched in triumph, tasting the freedom he had earned. The system confirmed. The ancient nightmare, the awakened D-rank Burning Mist, has been destroyed, its existence erased. Finally, he was able to speak the words, echoing in the empty space, "I have won." Looking at his trembling, bloody hands, Song Jinwoo felt a surge of strength flowing through him like a river. "I have finally truly awakened." These words were not just a cry, but a vow given to myself. New energy pulsed through his veins, coloring the air around him with a purple glow, heralding the inevitable changes. And this time, awakened and renewed, Song Jinwoo knew that he would be able to help those in need. The fragments of the past battle slowly settled, revealing a tormented world awaiting its savior. Song Jinwoo descended swiftly, his shadows following silently behind him, ready for new challenges and battles. Every movement was calculated, every step was a confirmation of his new, incredible power, capable of changing everything. Looking up at the shattered outside world, Song Jinwoo wondered what awaited him beyond the ruins. His shadow form slid forward, blade at the ready to cut down any threat that dared arise. From the gaping hole in the wall, Song Jinwoo surveyed the aftermath of his battle, the world he was meant to protect. At the very heart of chaos, a nightmare has awakened once again. The S-rank blazing mist, an ancient evil ready to devour everything in its path. Every movement he made was a crushing blow, tearing apart the very fabric of reality. The ground shook under his footsteps, exploding with dust and debris, foreshadowing imminent destruction. Buildings crumbled like houses of cards, their frames breaking under the onslaught of monstrous force. A piercing wail of sirens echoed across the city, echoing in the deserted streets. Every moment this sound reminded us of the impending catastrophe that no one could have dreamed of. From the depths of the dungeon beneath Hankook University of the Arts, something has emerged that threatens the very existence of the metropolis. Panic gripped hearts as reality surpassed the most terrifying legends. The cries of horror and despair were drowned out by the roar of collapsing structures and the fury of the monsters. The soldiers on the front lines could only watch helplessly as their world descended into chaos. Their hearts were breaking with helplessness as they waited for reinforcements, realizing that every second cost someone's life. The urgent deployment of high-ranking hunters was a task that required time, which the besieged city simply did not have. As cigarette smoke curled above his head, the commander flipped through the lists, desperately trying to find anyone who could stop this horror. The faces of the heroes flashed before his eyes, each of them being assessed by skill and rank, searching for the perfect combination for a deadly mission. But even the most experienced C-rank tanks seemed insignificant in the face of such a force. He chose Kim Jong-soo, a fearless hunter whose determination was matched only by his resilience. But at the same time, further away, in the very center of destruction, another drama was unfolding. Atop the rubble of the fallen city, a shadow warrior towered over his fallen foe, casting a red glow across the ground. The blood stained his clothes, but did not break his will, only fueled his determination. Bleeding but unbroken, Song Jin-woo looked into the face of his pain, knowing that all was not lost. And Wang Dansu appeared against him, awakening his true power with shining eyes and an evil smile. Song Jin-woo felt a burning pain, but his gaze remained sharp and a fire of resistance burned in his blue eyes. The speed of the impact was unimaginable, blurring the contours of reality and leaving behind only the echo of destruction. Every blow from Hwang Dong-soo was like an explosion, sending Jinwoo flying backwards, blood spraying out and mixing with sparks of energy. His body crashed into the ruins, scattering debris around him as he fell through the shattered world. But Hwang Dong-soo gave no respite, his blade cutting through the air again, aiming at the defeated enemy. A groan of pain escaped Seong Jinwoo's chest as he tried to rise, feeling his strength draining away. The giant towered over him, his aura pulsing with fury, ready to devour everything in his path. Hwang Dong-soo's face twisted into a grimace of insane pleasure as he unleashed his next attack on Jinwoo. Another blow, and blood stained the floor, leaving bloody traces in the chaos of the battle. Song Jinwoo desperately tried to dodge. His body was already refusing to obey, but his will remained unshakable. The corridors of the destroyed building shook with energy. Every step Hwang Dong-soo took was a harbinger of imminent death. Song Jinwoo was thrown back by a new wave of force, sliding across the floor, leaving a trail of dust and pain in his wake. He knew that this battle was beyond his current capabilities. The difference in ranks of the awakened was too great. But even on the brink of defeat, Song Jinwoo's determination did not wane, his jaw clenched, his eyes shining. As time passed, he clung desperately to hope, wondering when the other hunters would arrive. He had to hold on, had to stand firm, even when Hwang Dong-soo's figure emerged from the clouds of smoke again. Hatred and superiority were visible in Hwang Dong-soo's eyes. He was a predator playing with his prey. Every breath he took was filled with a thirst for destruction, and his lips were twisted into a sinister grin. But Seong Jinwoo, wounded and exhausted, only clenched his fists tighter, refusing to retreat in the face of the imminent threat. The building's shattered glass offered a terrifying view of the raging battle as trembling onlookers watched. Seong Jinwoo felt every blow, but his spirit, like tempered steel, only grew stronger in the crimson aura of determination. Below, others waited with bated breath, not daring to hope that the hunter's help would arrive. The ringing of metal pierced the air, heralding a new round of the deadly dance. He raised his dark blade again, every muscle in his body tensing with extreme tension. But the counterblow shook the ground, leaving a crater where the hero had stood a second ago. Pain pierced him, blood appeared on his torn clothes, and his eyes, full of horror and rage, looked at the enemy. The defiant, rocky giant, emitting an ominous blue glow, prepared for the next attack. His sword, dark and merciless, promised only oblivion, illuminating the space with a crimson light. Song Jinwoo gritted his teeth until they creaked, his face contorted in pain, but his gaze remained unwavering. Speed was his only salvation. Every jump was a desperate attempt to escape the inevitable. A blast of energy, he responded with a blow that could have split a mountain, but the monster didn't even falter. Exhausted, he still raised his eyes, and in their blue one could read an indomitable will to win. Shards of reality shattered around him as Seong Jinwoo tried to hold on to something that could decide the outcome of the battle. He dodged a crushing blow that carried the power of a destructive storm. The new wound on his face did not break his resolve. Seong Jinwoo knew he had to continue. Through the smoke and dust, on the ruins of a once thriving city, this confrontation continued. On the ground, among the rubble, lay a lifeless hand, foreshadowing new casualties. However, Song Jinwoo knew this monster, with its blazing eyes and flesh-hungry fangs, was not to be missed at any cost. And with that realization, he rushed forward, meeting the monster with his last, most furious blow. His body became a blur, pure speed that surpassed all limits. Song Jinwoo's fist, imbued with power, trembled, preparing to crush. A deafening blow crashed down on the enemy, exploding with pure, merciless power. The hunter's eyes were blazing with rage, every cell screaming for victory. Song Jinwoo's unwavering will guided every push, every impulse. The enemy trembled, its form distorted under the onslaught of unimaginable force. In a wild whirlwind of battle, they collided again, tearing apart the space around them. A monstrous groan escaped the monster's throat as the blow found its target. But the enemy did not flinch, responding with an equally brutal, bloody attack. Blade or claw, it didn't matter. Pain pierced through Seong Jinwoo's body. Blood gushed from his mouth, leaving a bitter taste of defeat on his lips. Overwhelmed by the force, he fell to the ground, debris flying around. A groan of agony and despair echoed across the battlefield. Above him towered the ominous shadow of the ram, triumphant in its superiority. But even in this abyss, in the depths of the tormented soul, a new, furious fire was lit. Song Jinwoo's heart pounded, echoing dully throughout his body, which was saturated with pain. The ram bowed, confident of his victory, not noticing the emerging threat. And suddenly, the heavens opened up and lightning pierced the earth, foreshadowing what was to come. Rising from the dust, Song Jinwoo looked forward, his gaze as hard as steel. Another flash, more powerful, more dazzling, marked his return. The energy generated by his return crashed down on the enemy, shaking reality itself. A mighty "okay" rang out in the air, signaling the beginning of a new, merciless battle. Song Jinwoo, exhausted but unyielding, felt the pain pierce through him, but it only spurred him on. The world around him blurred, distorted by inhuman speeds and force impulses. His fist clenched, every movement showing unbending will and determination. One of his loyal shadows rushed forward, taking what should have been a fatal blow. The barrier erected for protection shattered like fragile glass under the onslaught of monstrous force. The ringing chuch-chak echoed, foreshadowing the inevitable destruction. A loud chi-chang marked the clash of unimaginable powers. A sharp jack pierced the air as steel met flesh, or shadow met pure energy. Mighty Iron, his faithful guardian, unleashed a crushing blow, shaking the very dimension. Song Jinwoo collapsed to the ground, defeated, but his shadows continued to fight tirelessly. The earth opened up under the monstrous attack, absorbing a power capable of leveling mountains. Beads of sweat ran down his face, mixing with the blood, but an unquenchable fire still burned in his eyes. Wounded and bleeding, he looked defeat in the face, but in the depths of his pupils a storm lurked. Something ancient and powerful was awakening within him, woven from shadows and absolute will. He lay on the rubble, his body exhausted to the limit, but his soul yearning to join the fight again. And then, through the agony, a terrible call rang out, torn from his very being. In the glow of green light, the wounds began to heal, heralding an incredible rebirth, a new form. Arsha, his faithful warrior, stood by his side, ready to fight to the last, surrounded by his mighty comrades, whose strength only grew stronger. From the very darkness, clots of purple energy burst forth, foreshadowing the inevitable. The mighty Silad, whose body was now a living embodiment of shadow, looked with contempt at his enemies, calling them pathetic insects who dared to wound him. But the answer was not long in coming. A powerful blow pierced the air, cutting through the darkness and tore flesh. The body collapsed, leaving behind only a cloud of dust and despair. Song Jinwoo, his eyes blazing with a fierce blue fire, his face twisted in a grimace of rage, ready to accept the challenge. Under the force of his blow, the opponent flew back, and a random bystander grabbed his mop, trying to defend himself from the unthinkable. Screams of horror filled the air, as even an ordinary person could become a victim of this furious battle. And so the helpless witness fell to his knees, surrounded by bloody splashes, in utter despair in the face of absolute force. Dark spikes and blades rushed through space, leaving only chaos and destruction in their wake, sparing no one. Wave after wave of Silada's devastating attacks rained down on everything around them, turning the world into ruins. Song Jinwoo, gathering all his will, released a new wave of energy, his voice shaking the space and his eyes burning with determination. Each swing sent shockwaves through the air, defying the darkness itself. Deadly energy collided with dark currents, creating a vortex of pure destructive power. Even the mighty Silad shuddered under the hail of these attacks, his shadowy body twisted in pain. Song Jinwoo, growing stronger with each passing second, continued his onslaught, his will to win unwavering. Rapid flashes of purple light pierced the battlefield, dealing blows capable of tearing apart matter. The buildings around began to crack and collapse, unable to withstand the clash of two titanic forces. Windows shattered and the city was enveloped in smoke and debris, witnessing the unthinkable. In the very center of this chaos, a blinding, concentrated blue light flared, pure power ready to consume everything. And this light spread throughout the entire space, marking the culmination of the battle and the absolute triumph of power. This light was not just a glow, it was a wave of destruction that swept across the cityscape. Ordinary people, the soldiers who were trying to hold the line, could only look on in horror at the apocalypse around them. And from the gaping heavens, shadows appeared again, whose clawed paws brought only death and destruction. S.I. led, towering over the bodies of the fallen, was the embodiment of inevitable death in the ruined city. And every victim, every piece of debris screamed about the brutality of this battle, about the countless lives that were cut short. Suddenly, through the haze of pain, a whisper came, tender and familiar. "My prince." It was a memory, an image of a small child diligently drawing in his room. The rain outside did not stop him from filling the space with vivid fantasies about the world around him. His childish eyes reflected pure curiosity, alien to the world we had just seen. But even in this serene corner, the shadow of the past or the future could suddenly overtake him. The shadow that had previously seemed threatening suddenly spoke, its voice filled with surprise and perhaps tenderness. And in that moment of recognition, a light flashed, connecting two such different entities. But the reality was harsh. Song Soo-ho lay exhausted, with wounds that testified to a hard struggle. Opening his eyes, he found himself in an unfamiliar but safe environment. A hospital ward. There were familiar faces around him, concerned about his condition but ready to offer support. On the surface, the world appeared calm, but the scars of battle were deep and unlikely to heal quickly. The phone rang, breaking the silence, and on the other end of the line he could hear an agitated voice, full of concern for him. "I'm fine, Uncle," Sun Soo-ho replied, trying to reassure the caller, but his gaze was glued to the screen. The TV screen was showing breaking news, reporting on the recent upheavals. The incident in question left behind not only destruction, but also a deep mark on people's hearts, generating a wave of anxiety and discussion. Rage distorts his features, and his shining eyes reflect an ancient, unbridled power. While the news criticized the Hunters Association's belated action, the effects of the disaster were felt everywhere. The hunters' faces, framed by the crimson sky, betrayed shock and despair in the face of the incomprehensible. And here is the result of their inaction: destroyed streets, soaked in blood, and lifeless bodies littering the ground. The cornered student, his world crumbling before his eyes, screamed in terror, trying to point out something unimaginable. Somewhere in the distance, in the silence and semi-darkness, a young man was coming to his senses, his gaze filled with heavy thoughts. He rose abruptly from his hospital bed, feeling a strange emptiness and bewilderment. Questions pierced his mind like sharp shards. How did he survive his encounter with the flaming mist and its blade? Suddenly, the floor beneath him shimmered, and something unknown and mesmerizing began to emerge from the depths. It was a tiny but expressive shadow, with huge glowing eyes full of unspoken emotions. And in those eyes now splashed childish melancholy. A small shadow seemed to be crying from an old grievance. The young man's gaze pierced space, and his pupils glowed with an unearthly blue light, distorting the reality around him. Memories, like fragments of an ancient mirror, came together, revealing to him the faces of those he once knew. He recognized in them the creatures with whom he had shared his time as a child, dark and powerful, but so familiar. A small shadow hung in the air, its silent presence filled with mystery, as if it were a messenger from the past. New questions fell upon him like an avalanche, forcing him to search for answers in long-forgotten corners of his consciousness. His head was spinning with bewilderment. Why was his childhood intertwined with these mysterious creatures? He reached out to the shadow, and at the moment of touch, he felt the echo of a long-forgotten connection, awakening new strength in him. The next moment, the small shadow transformed, revealing its true form, and a name appeared above it: Burr. And so he finally stood up, feeling a new determination to unravel the mysteries of his past and face the future. Seong Jinwoo seems to be doing well, even joking about his talents as a healer while looking at the small shadow that swirls around nearby. But the peace was deceptive, because even the peaceful picture outside the window could not drown out the premonition of impending changes. Suddenly, reality around him began to crumble, revealing fragments of visions where he was fighting, and someone's voice was trying to convey to him a hidden truth. Song Jinwoo's eyes widened, realizing that what was happening was not just visions but fragments of his true memory that had been suppressed. The memory flashed with a bright pain, and Sheng Jinwu cried out in despair, realizing that his father had not simply disappeared, but had been sent on an unimaginable journey. The small shadow next to him seemed to be questioning, not understanding the depth of human grief and the revelations that had befallen its master. The boundaries of the world became thinner, and the very air around them was filled with a mysterious glow, foreshadowing the imminent appearance of something majestic. The darkness swirled and flowed like living matter, and sparks of unbridled power crackled in its depths. Ghostly hands reached out to him from all sides, and in one of them a ball flickered, full of ancient energy, granting knowledge of the future. He himself became the center of this storm, his silhouette growing, enveloped in a whirlwind of shadows, each of which awaited only his command. From the depths of his being, a shining eye emanated, emitting blue lightning, a symbol of inhuman power. Many of his shades, faithful to their last breath, gathered around, ready to fight, for the ancient oath still resounded in the air. Song Jinwoo digested the new revelations in silence, his eyes filled with deep thought and heavy determination. He dared to ask the question that burned in his heart about the fate of his mother, who had disappeared at the same time as his father, but the shadow's answer only deepened his anxiety. The shadow next to him seemed to feel the weight of this truth too, its glowing eyes expressing incomprehension or even suffering. Suddenly, the shadow trembled, exclaiming in fear, as if it itself felt the unbearable pain of realizing someone else's tragedy. And so, the shadow, splitting into two parts, revealed the name of the culprit, a certain Italum, whose apostles, according to her, were behind the disappearance. Song Jinwoo tried to comprehend what he had heard. Was it really true that a certain Italum was behind all his losses, behind all the tragedies of his family? Song Jinwoo's gaze became firm, his silence spoke louder than words, and the shadow beside him keenly sensed the growing determination of its master. The clenched fist spoke of a readiness to accept the fight, of an iron will that was now aimed at revealing all the secrets. Song Jinwoo's gaze hardened, his silence spoke louder than words, and a shadow beside him keenly sensed his master's growing resolve. His clenched fist spoke of a readiness to fight, of an iron will now directed toward uncovering all secrets. He lowered his eyes, in which a smoldering ember of reluctance smoldered, but strength was already pulsating in every cell of his being. And a voice from the shadows, insistent as the echo of fate, reminded him again, "You must become stronger, Song Jinwoo, to save Cha-Hae-in." A key materialized before him, a symbol of ancient mysteries and an unbearable burden of responsibility. Purple energy raged around him, responding to his internal struggle, shaking the space of reality itself. This key, dark and intricate, sought out its owner, offering a path to the unknown. Beyond him lay a world shrouded in mystery, a world that awaited its new master. An invisible force was calling him, and Song Jinwoo felt the world around him begin to change in response to the call. He took a step, picking up the key, whose shape had now become a familiar part of his hand. With a light, barely perceptible movement, the key met with emptiness, which dissolved into swirling shadow. And then, with a loud crack, the energy burst out, as if opening a long-locked door to the universe. An explosion of power shattered the silence, heralding an inevitable collision with fate. His body responded to the call, feeling a dizzying whirlpool that pulled him into the heart of the portal. Now he stood on the threshold of the unknown, shrouded in radiance and shadows, ready to take on the challenge. Thoughts raced through his mind, mixing fears and determination into one. All these stories about space, the War of the Gods and the Lord of Shadows, to him it seemed like nothing more than a farce. But inside he felt only one thing, an indomitable desire to fight for those he valued. The image of Cha-Hae, her smile full of hope, promising peace, came to his mind. Their clasped hands, in the rays of the setting sun, were the true meaning of everything for him. And now, with clear, piercing eyes, Song Jinwoo looked ahead, not doubting his path. His hand, shrouded in purple glow, promised power capable of crushing worlds. But even among the shadows, questions were raised, about the ancient seal, about the power that could change everything. And when the loyal servant asked for permission to act as he saw fit, Song Jinwoo knew that from now on, every decision would carry weight. The world around him began to distort, crumbling into swirls of shadow and light. An unknown force was consuming him, pulling him into the depths of the unknown. In response, the shadows awoke, their eyes lighting up with determination, heralding battle. Song Jinwoo himself stood at the epicenter of this collapse, his figure enveloped in shining energy. Space split, opening a gate into an abyss, swirling into a whirlpool of pure ether. Through the growing hum of the portal, his gaze remained tense, full of foreboding. Faithful shadows, powerful and menacing, formed around him, ready to spring. His eyes reflected determination. He was ready to accept any fate. And so, he hovered over the ruins, over the abandoned city that had once been a home. Branches entwined the dead buildings, nature reclaiming its territory, hiding ancient secrets. A new place, a new threat. Every nerve in Song Jinwoo was tingling with tension. The shadows deepened, their silent presence becoming even more palpable, foreshadowing the trials to come. And despite the uncertainty, his gaze remained firm, focused on the future. Below him lay a world forgotten by time, shrouded in purple gloom. Every stone, every crack told the story of a great fall. Is this the Shadow Dungeon, or does it look more like a ruined city? Song Jinwoo's thoughts raced, trying to comprehend what he saw. Cold calculation and unwavering will could be seen in his piercing gaze, ready to meet the inevitable. The ground crumbled beneath his sandals, each step echoing in the dead silence. Suddenly, an ominous glow tore through the darkness, foreshadowing something more dangerous than mere destruction. Beside him, his faithful companion, as if sensing the impending threat, quietly whispered, "It's time to tense up, my prince." And then, from the shadows, the first opponent emerged, axe at the ready, clearly ready for the test, as Song Jinwoo called it. A moment later, the enemy was already looming over him, closing the distance with lightning speed, but there was no trace of fear in Song Jinwoo's eyes. The axe blade whistled past his face, but Song Jinwoo dodged it with a grace and speed unimaginable for an ordinary person. Lying on the ground, he looked up and his eyes flashed an icy blue, foreshadowing a cruel retribution. Before him stood a goblin scout, a creature from nightmares, whose red eyes burned with malice and bloodthirstiness. But the fear the goblin tried to instill turned against him when Song Jinwoo rose to his full height. With a swift dash, he rose into the air, bringing down a blow on his opponent that sent the goblin scout flying like a doll. There was only a slight smile on his face, his gaze sparkling with cold calculation, a harbinger of what would happen next. The goblin, not expecting such strength, raised his axe and let out a furious cry, calling for help or simply pouring out his anger. Rage took hold of him, and a purple aura flared around the goblin's body, ready to devour anyone who stood in his way. But Song Jinwoo merely drew his blade, his eyes once again glowing, radiating a deadly determination. And with one lightning-fast blow, piercing the air, he put an end to this fight, crushing the enemy. "Look," came a quiet voice, addressing either the defeated enemy or an invisible companion. Before his eyes appeared glowing tablets describing awakened beings of various ranks, new targets for his growing army of shadows. Each defeated enemy is another step towards unimaginable power, which is marked by the familiar but always desired level up. The situation had calmed down again, but Song Jinwoo's wariness remained, as the real threat could be lurking around every corner. And his gaze turned upward, where another goblin scout was already waiting on a ruined building, ready to issue a challenge. Song Jinwoo, whose eyes glowed with an unearthly blue light, only chuckled, confirming his guess. There was another scout. But this time, the goblin did not hesitate, his wounded hand tightly clutching the polearm. This warrior, unlike the previous one, did not flinch but only let out a battle cry full of rage. And now, new enemies appeared before him. The goblin centurion, dressed in scraps of ancient armor, and his silent companion. Following them, crushing the remains of the buildings, rushed the goblin captain, surrounded by his fierce retinue. At this moment, Yu Jinho, who suddenly appeared next to him, looked confused, as if he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. His gaze was fixed on the new goblin archer on the roof, and he regretfully stated that he could not help. But Song Jinwoo was no longer listening, his eyes fixed on the vast army of goblins that filled the ruined city. The time for words had passed. With each passing second, the enemies drew closer, and Song Jinwoo summoned his power, preparing for battle. In one motion, he sent a ghostly axe crashing straight into the skull of the nearest goblin. Pain pierced the monster, but his brethren had already surrounded the hero from all sides, striking. However, Song Jinwoo's power was undeniable. A wave of blue energy repelled all who dared to approach. He didn't just defend himself, but went on the counterattack, creating a whirlwind of destructive force around himself. It was a new skill he had, deeply ingrained into his very being, allowing him to control invisible forces. The ruler's power was the name of this ability, which gave him control over the battlefield. Clenching his fist, he felt the energy of the world obey his will, becoming an extension of his power. His gaze slid to the archer on the roof, realizing that this threat would not go unnoticed. The crystal sword flew into the air, charged with blue energy, ready to deliver a crushing blow. The arrows fired by the goblin himself suddenly turned around and pierced his own body. An invisible hand returned every fired projectile back to its sender, demonstrating absolute superiority. But even for the mighty Beru, nursing little Song Suho turned out to be a challenge full of unpredictable dangers. The world he so longed for seemed far away, and everyday life was just an obstacle that kept him from his true goal. And once again, reality crashed down on him, the wild roar of hundreds of toothy goblins thirsting for battle. But he was ready, each blow of his invisible blade leaving a trail of fallen enemies. A cold blue fire burned in the depths of his eyes, reflecting boundless strength and unshakable determination. He had to move quickly. Every moment could be the last in this mad dance of death. With one movement, he tore the flesh, leaving behind only emptiness and a short death rattle, a powerful, bone-crushing blow that marked the inevitable end for anyone who stood in its path. The battlefield became a whirlwind of shadows and steel, where every swing of his hand was deadly. From the depths of the shadows, his faithful warrior burst forth, his silhouette inspiring terror even in the most fearless goblins. But among them was one who radiated a different kind of power. The goblin centurion, whose gaze burned with a furious rage. The goblin leader advanced, his roar filling the air with the promise of a bloody massacre. Jinwoo gripped the dagger's hilt tighter, feeling the ancient power awakening in every fiber of his body. The enemy legions advanced, their weapons glittering in the dim light, foreshadowing a fierce battle. At that very moment, the space around him flared with a blinding light, foreshadowing something grandiose. Seong Jinwoo rushed forward, his eyes burning with determination, and the dagger turned into a blurry streak of death. Every leap, every blow was deadly. He danced among his enemies, leaving only chaos in his wake. The goblins fell one after another, not having time to understand where their inevitable death came from. Even the mighty centurion faltered under the onslaught, his furious gaze giving way to bewilderment. But Jinwoo only grinned, his gaze full of dark, almost predatory joy from the battle. Jinwoo continued his dance of death, his blades flashing in the semi-darkness, leaving his enemies no chance to resist. It seemed like his body couldn't take it anymore, but every blow only fueled his inhuman determination. His eyes burned with a cold blue flame, reflecting a will that knew no fear. A crushing blow, imbued with a mysterious power, shook the air, raking the defenses of the last enemies. Deftly evading attacks, he glided among the creatures like a shadow, leaving behind only fallen bodies. Finally, the battle died down, and only the corpses of the monsters testified to the recent bloody harvest. The fallen warrior's eyes were frozen in terror forever, his silent scream echoing in the silence. Jinwoo sank heavily to the ground, his body trembling with fatigue, but his soul was calm, as if after a long journey. But the peace was short-lived. The familiar system alert burst into his thoughts again, heralding a new stage. Even in his fatigue, he felt the presence of an awakening power gathering in the shadows around him. Through the fog of fatigue, he read the conditions and, without hesitation, confirmed his choice. And so, darkness began to gather around him, enveloping his figure, while Song Jinwoo himself became the embodiment of shadow. He felt his body being transformed, every muscle filling with unprecedented power. It wasn't just a level up, it was a rebirth, a transformation from a weak hunter into something greater than he could have ever imagined. He accepted this power, this reward, without hesitation, realizing that it would make him invincible. An artifact materialized in his hand, pulsing with ancient magic, which granted him a new, unprecedented skill. And so he stood in the midst of a shattered world, a lord of shadows, ready to accept his true destiny. The idea that he could subjugate the dead, turning them into his loyal warriors, struck his imagination. But each new skill required effort, and the path to absolute power lay through countless battles and sacrifices. He reached out to the fallen, ready to call upon the first warriors of his army, knowing that the hunter world would never accept such a force. Song Jinwoo realized that his new power required not only thought, but also words, which added to the difficulty of controlling his power. The Dark Companion waited attentively for his master to grasp the essence of the new ability, anticipating the battles to come. Then Song Jinwoo extended his hand, and at his command, the space around him split into flashes of blue energy. From the very darkness, through worlds and dimensions, an invisible power began to break through. On the dead ground, where the battle had recently raged, lay the fallen enemies, their bodies mere shells. And then, from the inky shadow, as if from nothingness, a clawed green hand emerged, the herald of a new call. In an instant, a whole cohort of ugly creatures, reborn as faithful servants, rose from the dust, ready to serve. "Shadow extraction," whispered Song Jinwoo, shocked by the true nature of his power that resurrected the fallen. But instead of majestic warriors, what appeared before him was an army of lesser goblins, confused and diminished in size. Even they, the creatures of the shadows, seemed puzzled as to why their new form was so different from their previous one. Sanji Ain Wu was annoyed, his new servant, as if mockingly, did not possess such an important ability of the Shadow Vault. The Dark Companion, in his mute form, only shrugged helplessly, unable to offer a solution. I get it, don't be sad, I take it, Son Jindu said with a slight sigh, accepting the reality of his still imperfect army. And then fatigue washed over him. Son Jian Wu realized that, absorbed in the battles, he had not eaten for 2 days. The system offered a way out, but for Son Jinzu, hunger was the primary concern, and he decided to leave this place to find food. Food, so simple and ordinary, now seemed to him a real miracle, bringing him back to life. Sitting at the table in the futuristic interior, Son Jin Woo savored every bite while his shadow Beru waited patiently. But even during this much-needed rest, the invisible companion was already setting new goals, his thoughts full of frantic determination. Then, Son Jinwoo, still chewing, heard a sentence that once again called him into the depths of the dungeons to hunt for the demonic beast. And here he stood again, majestic and unbending, with a flame in his eyes and the aura of a monarch, ready to conquer new heights. The question about his mother, sounding like a ghostly echo, made Son Jinwoo once again search for answers in a world full of mysteries. He was not the only one eager to fight. The loyal Baru, unwilling to remain in the shadow of the ordinary soldier, was eager to show all his ferocious power. After all, it was through absorbing the magic and knowledge of fallen monsters that he, the Shadow Monarch, strengthened his power, although he acknowledged that there were more effective ways. And, in the end, all roads led to the inevitable, to a new dive into the danger-filled depths of the dungeon. The last crumbs of breakfast were quickly eaten, marking the end of the short lull. Well, time to get ready, he whispered to himself, knowing that without the hunter's qualifications, the dungeon gates would remain forever closed. The rapid rhythm of the city was reflected in his eyes, but his mind was already far away, beyond the boundaries of the familiar world. The metropolis, bathed in morning light, seemed calm and serene, deceptively hiding its secrets. In the distance, within the cold walls of the guild office, someone was already holding the key to the next mission. Son Jin Woo felt a growing sense of anticipation, sensing an inevitable confrontation with the unknown, while the world around lived its ordinary life, unaware of the fine line between reality and chaos. He walked confidently, his shadow barely noticeably following at his heels, a faithful companion in any danger. Words of consolation, even if they were sincere, only deepened his melancholy, unable to drown out the call of fate. He raised his hand as if in a silent appeal to higher powers, ready to accept whatever was in store. The power he had been accumulating for so long pulsed invisibly in his palm. In every look of his, one could see an unshakable will capable of moving mountains. Perhaps there is only one way, whispered the shadow of Baru, offering a new path to the solution. Thus began the familiar cycle. The attacking squad broke through hordes of monsters, clearing the dungeon of filth. They were followed by collection teams, meticulously removing traces of the battle and collecting the remains of fallen animals. And only at the very end, when everything was over, did miners appear to extract precious resources from the depths of the earth. Miners, hunters of the lowest rank, delved into the depths of this shining dungeon, each strike of their picks echoing in the icy silence. One of them, Ayu Jinho, froze for a moment, looking up as if trying to see something beyond the veil of blue mist. Next to him, crouched by a shimmering crystal, another man was working, and Yu Jinho, with a touch of irony, reminded him of his rank. That man was Lim Du Gong, an associate professor of painting at Hankook University, an awakened one, but only a pitiful E-rank, forced to do this hard work. Yu Jinho seemed to work tirelessly, his strikes swift and precise, sending sparks flying from the stubborn ore. He glanced briefly at Lim Dugong, his eyes showing a mixture of weariness and subtle confidence. Lim Dugong, exhausted and sweaty, could barely stand on his feet, his face expressing complete exhaustion. Memories of ridicule, of his helplessness, of the pain he had been unable to prevent, flashed before his mind's eye. Yu Jihano, noticing his condition, said with slight regret that he could not change anything. He gently but firmly asked Lim Dugong to raise his head, reminding him that they were both in the same position, both only E-rank. Surprised and alarmed, Lim Diogon slowly looked up at his partner. But instead of words, he began to quickly and incoherently talk about a strange, almost unreal vision that had haunted him. Fragments of a terrifying battle flashed through his mind, where, as he fled in panic, he swore he had seen a certain Suho fighting a monster on the roof of a building. And this battle, filled with rage and despair, was so real that it seemed snatched from the very abyss of a nightmare. Yu Jinhu merely continued his work, casually dismissing the story as empty nonsense. Lim Do Gong, meanwhile, continued to doubt whether he had simply imagined this incredible sight, since an awakened E-rank simply could not survive in such a fight. But suddenly, behind his back, an ominous shadow materialized from the shadows, and someone's invisible hand touched his shoulder. Horror gripped Lim Do. "Gong!" he screamed, trying to crawl away from the incarnate demonic beast that appeared right in the middle of the cave. Bai Yu Jinho, without losing his composure, asked why this creature appeared to them, while the shadow calmly called Lim Du Gong just a weak ant larva. And that was the death sentence for most E-ranks, lacking any special skills. Any encounter with true danger was certain death, and Lim Jung was only incredibly lucky to still be alive. Yu Yuinho, without losing his cool, asked why the creature had appeared to them, while the shadow calmly dismissed Lim Duogong as nothing more than a weak ant larva. And that was the death knell for most E-rankers. Lacking any special skills, any encounter with true danger was certain death, and Lim Duogong was incredibly lucky to still be alive. In the light of the lanterns, Lim Duogong showed something to Yu Jinho with almost childish enthusiasm, his face shining with anticipation. However, their apparent safety proved to be an illusion when Lim Duogong cowered in terror, muttering that his bravery was just a pretense. A dark entity appeared behind them like a ghostly guardian, and Yu Jinho only looked at it silently, realizing that Lim Duogong was just a pawn in someone's game. Yu Jinho carefully examined the rock walls surrounding them, whose sharp edges rose upward, disappearing into the impenetrable darkness. Beneath their feet stretched the jagged earth, shrouded in a mystical fog that hid their path forward and back. Deep in the cave, the path was illuminated only by the ghostly glow of rare crystals, creating the illusion of safety in a silent trap. Suddenly, a predatory beast with blazing red eyes burst out of the darkness, its mouth ready to tear apart anyone who dared to pass. One of the hunters, clutching a bloody axe in his hand, only dryly noted that so far they had only encountered wolves, but the premonition did not give them any peace. Among the fallen creatures, other hunters realized with bitterness, magic stones are rare, but there was no choice. They must move on, no matter what. And one of them, with a predatory grin, pointed into the distance, where the light flickered, promising a new, unknown danger. Before them stood a monumental structure, a gigantic, ancient mechanism of obsidian and glowing purple crystal, seemingly living its own sinister life. The ground around him was riddled with cracks, the air was thick with tension, and reflections of light danced on the shards, as if warning of impending disaster. The hunters froze, their faces expressing a mixture of fear and awe before this unearthly creation, which could not be the work of mere creatures. One of them, with anxiety in his voice, asked, "What is the purpose of such a structure if there are no demonic beasts?" And the answer was simple: it will be found right now. In the center of this mystical circle, as if nailed to the ground, stood a gigantic sword, emitting an ominous red glow, its tip pointing towards the heavens. The hunters, stunned by the artifact's grandeur, couldn't believe their eyes. One of them whispered that he never thought such a thing actually existed. Another, with shining eyes, could not restrain himself. "A real treasure," his voice echoed throughout the cave, anticipating untold riches. However, a wiser warrior warned, "There may be traps hidden behind such treasures. Take it very carefully," but the thirst for profit was stronger than reason. And then one of them, enveloped in a red aura, stepped forward, his hand slowly but decisively reaching for the hilt of his sword. The air crackled with invisible energy, foreshadowing impending disaster. But instead of glory, he was engulfed only in the ominous flames of an ancient trap. The ground beneath their feet cracked, opening up into sharp spikes created from the darkness itself. The sword he had coveted so much flared with a crimson light, like an ancient entity awakening. And his power was not a blessing, but a curse that penetrated into the very soul. The monstrous power contained within the blade demanded its victim, choosing the most greedy one. And he, the one who dared to touch it, became only a puppet in the hands of an unknown will. From the depths of the blade itself came a dull, furious voice, full of ancient resentment. The warrior's eyes widened in horror and the realization of his own fatal mistake. The blood boiled in his veins, his mind was consumed by an unbearable cry of agony. The world around was distorted, torn apart by a sudden explosion of monstrous energy. His body shook, and an eerie yellow light erupted from his eyes, heralding a complete rebirth. Blow followed blow, leaving no chance for resistance to the awakened evil. Incomprehensible horror gripped the companions who witnessed the nightmare unfolding before them. They watched as their comrade writhed in agony, turning into something horrible. But this was no longer a man, but the embodiment of pure, primal rage, a servant of the blade. The once proud warriors were now just frightened victims who realized their fate. Too late they realized that behind the treasure lay not only wealth, but also inevitable death. Each blow echoed through the walls of the ancient crypt, foreshadowing the end. A final scream broke the silence before darkness engulfed all who dared to disturb this place. A battle raged in a whirlwind of red energy, the movements so swift that the line between attacker and victim disappeared. A furious cry erupted from the warrior's chest, his eyes glowing yellow, embodying absolute determination. The sound of shattering crystal echoed throughout the cave, each flash marking another source of ancient power destroyed. The stunned hunters froze, their faces distorted with horror at what they saw, not understanding what kind of nightmare was unfolding before them. Before them, among the shining fragments, summoned goblins danced in battle, their unprecedented power making one doubt the reality of what was happening. Understanding came suddenly. Summoning so many creatures at once was beyond all known rules. It was a power of a different order. Yu Jianho, smiling casually, just watched, and next to him, a small shadow companion fluttered, exuding a mysterious aura. While his summoned creatures were ravaging the surrounding area, he was lost in his thoughts, weighing every step in this deadly game. Eugeno's eyes glittered with cold calculation, and his faithful shadow friend, apparently Beru, vibrated faintly in anticipation. Meanwhile, the other miners, encouraged, set to work with redoubled energy, eager to show their valor. But Yu Jianho had his own plans. His gaze slid over the crystals, and the thought of completing their long-standing third mission matured in his head. After all, in order to strengthen your faithful shadow companion, it was enough to simply absorb the magic hidden in these shimmering fragments. Beru, sensing the proximity of incredible power, let out a low, guttural growl, his dark body trembling with anticipation. And at that very moment, the space around was torn apart by a deafening surge of energy, a harbinger of something great and terrible. Turning around, Yu Jianho sensed a presence that made his blood run cold. Somewhere nearby, the Monarch had awakened. The terrible truth dawned on them. This world was inhabited not by one, but by many such monstrous overlords. A powerful tremor caused the walls of the cave to shake, and the hunters peered into the menacing darkness in panic. Their faces twisted in the realization that only one kind of creature could emerge from the depths, bringing only death. Someone's desperate cry disappeared into thin air as a colossal shadow loomed over the terrified hunter, foreshadowing the inevitable end. And so, from the depths, legions of hellish demons crawled out, their burning eyes promising only death and oblivion. Someone's desperate cry vanished into thin air as a colossal shadow loomed over the terrified hunter, heralding his inevitable end. And then, from the depths, legions of hellish demons crawled out, their blazing eyes promising only death and oblivion. Panic gripped everyone. Cries of "Run!" echoed throughout the dungeon as horror overtook the retreating men. One of them, overcome with animal fear, desperately waved away the approaching shadow, begging for salvation. But the prayers went unheard, and a monster's steel fangs closed, tearing apart the defense. The grinding of metal on flesh, and only the pick in his hands held up the onslaught. But for how long? The beast attacked again and again, each blow bringing the inevitable end closer, forcing him to desperately dodge. But then, like a shadow, San Jing-yu appeared, his gaze burning with determination. "I will buy you time." His steps shook the earth, each blow on the stones echoing in the dark cave. Alone, he charged towards the legion of steel lichens, charging up the rocky slope with his pickaxe at the ready. There was an icy calm in his eyes, despite the beads of sweat running down his temple. They were steel-toothed lichens, and their power reminded him of the burning fog, but San Jing-yu knew not one could handle them. He could have handled it, but not this time. After all, Yu Jianho stood behind him, needing protection. Yu Jianho continued his work, but his face showed tension. Anxiety was in the air. Realizing this, San Jin-woo made a decision. His shadow goblins appeared out of nowhere to become an unbreakable wall for his comrade. His hand slid across an invisible panel, selecting weapons for his new allies. And so, the goblins appeared in all their glory. Their weapons from the Dungeon of Shadows surpassing ordinary pickaxes by hundreds of times, astonishing Yu Jianho. A powerful kick shook the hard rock, sending fragments flying in all directions. He himself rushed forward rapidly, his silhouette dissolving in a blinding flash of light. The hellish wolves rushed forward, their silhouettes outlined against the piercing radiance. A ferocious roar rent the air, bearing steel fangs ready for a deadly bite. A sharp lunge. The blade of the sword ripped through the air, leaving behind only scraps of shadows and flashes of energy. But Yu Jinho, surrounded by vile goblins and a loyal shadow spirit, watched the battle with undisguised horror. Song Jinwoo's face remained expressionless, reflecting only cold determination in the face of the encroaching chaos. The call of the shadows echoed in his soul, and new terrible creatures appeared from nothingness, ready to fight at his will. Fear distorted Yu Jinho's features as the goblin horde advanced, the shadow spirit watching closely. Every swing of Song Jinwoo's blade was deadly. He chopped and slashed, holding back the onslaught of the furious creatures. A flash of blue magic illuminated the battlefield, cutting through the darkness and pushing the monsters back. Even the small shadow spirit acknowledged his strength, realizing that Song Jinwoo had already reached unprecedented heights of mastery. Song Jinwoo, with cold observation, noted every movement, every reaction of his summoned beasts. His hands, one clutching a blade, the other emitting a mystical light, were instruments of unimaginable destructive power. Another blow, and the demonic wolf crumbled into clouds of darkness, unable to withstand the onslaught. The blade sank into the flesh, piercing the enemy through and through, leaving a trail of blood. And even Yu Jinho, having overcome his fear, prepared to enter the battle, armed with everything he could find. The goblin, stunned, recoiled as a new shadow entity emerged from the ground, and Song Jinwoo retreated, leaving the battle behind. The goblin, driven to his limit, only let out a pitiful squeak, his eyes full of genuine horror. In the other, his kinsman trembled with fear, sensing his imminent death. Large tears streamed down his green face, and his glowing eyes reflected the futility of his resistance. Song Jinwoo stood like a lord, surrounded by his loyal shadow wolves, with his fallen enemies in the background. Despite the tension, a slight smile played on his face, a sign of confidence in his unrivaled strength. But Yu Jinho seemed to be completely depressed, and Song Jinwoo, with a slight sigh, wondered how to explain everything that had happened to him. Despite the tension, a slight smile played across his face, a sign of confidence in his unrivaled strength. But Yu Jinho seemed utterly dejected, and Song Jinwoo, with a soft sigh, wondered how to explain everything that had happened. Yu Jinho, tormented by self-doubt, couldn't help but feel suspicious of his companion. Suddenly, there was a sharp metallic ringing sound, as if an alarm had sounded somewhere deep inside the mind. And then, before him, an ominous word appeared. Quest? Bursting out of the void, like a sentence leading into the abyss of this damned cave. The heavy, relentless footsteps echoed in the silence, heralding the arrival of something ancient and powerful. A silhouette emerged from the mist, massive and clad in dark armor that emitted an unearthly red glow. It was AMMU, who appeared out of nowhere, and his menacing appearance left Yu Jinho frozen in shock. But before they had time to come to their senses, space was torn apart by an explosion, marking the beginning of a deadly attack. The bespectacled hunter, barely aware of what was happening, could only breathe out a questioning, "Huh?" in the face of an imminent threat. A grotesque ram loomed directly above him, its flaming eyes emitting red rays ready to incinerate everything in its path. There was a blinding flash, and the hunter's glasses shattered into pieces, and horror froze in his eyes. His body was thrown with incredible force, flying several meters before falling onto the cold ground. However, the next moment, Song Jinwoo, moving with lightning speed, intercepted the new attack aimed at his comrade. The ground shook and split where the deadly energy passed, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. Yu Jinho's face was distorted with panic, but behind him, Song Jinwoo was already gathering his strength, preparing for battle. From the shadows, like a living nightmare, Beru burst forth, his outlines shimmering with purple light, ready for battle. With incredible fury, he fell upon the huge ram, forcing it to recoil from the unexpected blow. Song Jinwoo picked up the shaking Yu Jinho, whose head was spinning from shock and whose thoughts were racing with only one thing. A crazy hunter again? The ram let out a furious roar, his red eyes blazing with a new, searing hatred. In a whirlwind of shadows and steel, Song Jinwoo and his summon, moving as one, unleashed a barrage of blows on the maddened enemy. But even in the midst of the battle, the system, like an invisible guide, transmitted important information to Song Jinwoo. His opponent, Ram, possessed colossal power, but he was not a true monarch, only a tool, which, however, at this stage was impossible to defeat. Meanwhile, the little shadow soldier, Song Jinwoo's faithful companion, anxiously recognized the attacking monarch as the long-lost prince, whose appearance was unexpected and tragic. Song Jinwoo's glittering blades multiplied in the air, falling upon the ram with inexorable speed. Each blow pierced his flesh, drawing a cry of pain and rage from the ram, his features distorted by the unbearable wounds. The mighty monarch, whose armor seemed indestructible, staggered under the onslaught of phantom attacks that shook his very being. The entire arena around them turned into a chaotic whirlpool of blue and red light, symbolizing a titanic clash of wills. The ram's face, eaten away by rage, was ablaze with fire, his eyes blazing with yellow flame, promising terrible revenge. Surrounded by a swarm of hovering blades, Song Jinwoo struck with precision and mercilessness, his every move deadly. Again and again the RAM shook from the blows, his body was torn apart by an invisible force, but his will did not give in. In this whirlwind of attacks, his powerful figure seemed almost broken, but each time he found the strength to resist. A roar came from his throat, mixed with pain, but a spark of defiance still burned in his yellow eyes. Song Jinwoo, on the other hand, drew strength from this battle, his resolve hardening with each blow to defeat the red name and become even stronger. The little shadow companion only confirmed his words with a silent but deep gaze, full of understanding of his path. Every movement of Song Jinwoo, every swing of his blade, was aimed at one goal: to crush the enemy standing before him. His figure was almost invisible in the fast-paced dance of battle, surrounded by ghostly swords striking. And while the battle raged, the system itself, in the form of a small spirit, watched the fight, recording every turn of fate. A bead of sweat appeared on Song Jinwoo's face, but a cold, indomitable fire of absolute determination burned in his blue eyes. At that moment, Ram, consumed by the flames of his own rage, realized the full depth of his opponent's strength, his face twisted in a grimace of bitter understanding. His gaze, now full not only of rage but also of a dark determination, rose to the sky, foreshadowing a new, even more ferocious round of battle. A furious roar rent the air as the monstrous maw, like a part of the ram itself, opened in a menacing grin, its single eye glowing with anticipation. San Jingyan-woo, surrounded by loyal shadows, met the onslaught with the composure of a warrior, his blade cutting through the darkness like lightning. One of the shadow wolves, its glowing eyes narrowed, bit into its target, its sharp fangs tearing at the air, ready to rip flesh. The hero realized that only magical power could tame this furious force, and his shadows rushed into battle again. With incredible speed, the dark wolf-like creatures of the ram rushed forward, each of their lunges leaving a blood-red trail in the air. San Jian-woo turned to his companion, his gaze demanding an explanation as the spirit hesitated to find the words to describe the enemy's power. In Ram's hands, the blade came to life, pulsing with dark energy, ready to fall upon those who dared to challenge it. Every muscle tensed as Ram drew his sword, his eyes glowing golden, reflecting an indomitable determination. A surprised Son Jinwoo raised an eyebrow at the voice that shouldn't have been heard, while his shadow companion panicked as he realized the enemy's unexpected ability. From the depths of the monstrous mouth, full of sharp fangs, came a sound filled with ancient fury and bloody anticipation, as if the ram itself was speaking through it. In the blink of an eye, the heavens opened up and a blue sword of light pierced through space, aiming straight at the ram, who let out a cry of pain. Each attack sent Ram into deafening pain, but his eyes burned with an unyielding fury, ready to burn anyone who stood in his way. With a confident smile on his face, San Jinwoo clutched the shining axe in his hands, anticipating the opportunity to test the true power of the ruler. The battle flared up again, blue and red flashes clashing in the air, reflecting the furious dance of two unwavering warriors. Watching the explosion of power, San Jinwoo merely chuckled, acknowledging the power of the enemy with the red name, but confidently declaring the ease with which he could deal with its attacks. If so, his voice rang out, and countless blades burst from the ground around Son Jin-woo, ready to serve their master. The monstrous mouth opened again, but this time a frantic scream, full of pain and absolute rage, emitted from it, reflecting the suffering of the ram. "We must win with numbers," San Jing-yu declared decisively, and at his signal, countless shadows rushed forward, creating a flurry of attacks. The battlefield became a whirlwind of chaos, where every blow, every flash of light and shadow testified to a merciless fight. The Shadow Companion finally revealed the secret: his innate skill, the power he has been using since childhood, is the might of a ruler. However, even this great power of the ruler seemed to have its limits. Every movement, every blow tore apart the space, but the enemy held on no matter what. The monster, twisted with rage, let out a feral roar, its eyes burning with madness as it attacked without stopping. But suddenly, through the furious onslaught, a bluish silhouette flashed, foreshadowing a new clash. Song Jinwoo's eyes, glowing with blue fire, reflected the realization that the critical moment had arrived. His hand clutched an invisible weapon, ready to meet the onslaught as everything around him crumbled to dust. He dodged deadly blows, each of which could have been his last, as the world around him crumbled. The ruler's power showed itself once again, striking a blow the enemy could not have foreseen. The weapon, which seemed indestructible, crumbled into dust, unable to withstand the incredible pressure. Now he had only to dodge the barrage of destructive attacks, knowing that it was impossible to repel them. Sweat appeared on his face, but his gaze remained steely, reflecting an unbending will. It was a desperate race against death, where the slightest mistake meant an inevitable end, and time was working against him. The enemy, blinded by rage, howled in impotence, not understanding how his prey continued to elude him. But then, a slight smile appeared on Song Jinwoo's face, which contained anticipation of something more. His shadow devil rushed forward as the ruler's power tore apart space, opening up new possibilities. Song Jinwoo himself remained motionless, while his faithful companion awaited further instructions. The shadow revealed new secrets. His power was only a return to what was once sealed, his innate heritage. Deep within his being, a primordial power was awakening, ancient and all-consuming, the true nature of the monarch. He understood that this power could not be simply thrown aside. Its roots were deeper than any trials. And then, from the depths of the shadow, came confirmation. Not a single step, not a single battle had been in vain. Everything had led to this moment. The battle raged, a furious dance of shadows and metal where every swing could be the last. But even in this chaos where his power was blossoming, a painful determination was frozen on Song Jinwoo's face. Even his loyal shadows, usually impassive, seemed shaken by the power that emanated from their master. His call was answered by wild, ghostly cries that echoed across the battlefield as his shadow wolves rushed forward. The enemy, blinded by rage, cried out about the futility of efforts, not knowing the true depth of the shadow. The shadows multiplied, their howl becoming a symphony of destruction, heralding the approach of the inevitable. Each shadow beast was the embodiment of his will, predatory and merciless. Fear contorted his opponent's features as the shadow closed around him, promising a swift end. Explosions of energy illuminated the battlefield, turning the space into a kaleidoscope of pain and despair. Among them, the titans stood out, their fangs ready to tear reality apart. Song Jinwoo, standing in the midst of the storm of his own summoning, was the conductor of this deadly symphony. In response to the onslaught of shadows, the enemy unleashed his fury, trying to break through the impenetrable defense. His mad grin was a last, desperate gesture in the face of the inevitable. The clash of forces was colossal. Every movement echoed and thundered. But Song Jinwoo was no longer the same. His body was becoming an instrument of unimaginable power. The blows of his shadow-tempered fists could pierce through any armor. Each of his blows was a chord in this song of destruction, bringing final defeat. The world shook from the flash that engulfed everything in its radiance. And then, from behind the veil of smoke, the true form of the shadow appeared, judging the weakness of the defeated enemy. Song Jinwoo, the master of this shadow, stood unwavering. His power was now absolute, and he knew it. Hwang Dong-soo, battered but unbroken, raised his head, his gaze blazing with a maddened rage, heralding a final, desperate thrust. But the shadow knew no mercy. Its blade fell with crushing force, cutting through the air and hope. Hwang Dong-soo's eyes reflected pain and despair, the last sparks of resistance fading under the onslaught of superior power. Song Jinwoo stepped forward, meeting the enemy's storm of fury with a cold, calculated strike that caused the ground to shake. His gaze, full of determination and strength, pierced right through, every muscle tense, every drop of sweat a testament to his unyielding will. Hwang Dong-soo's roar echoed across the battlefield, a frantic farewell cry, full of pain and helplessness in the face of his fate. Shards of reality flew apart as shadow blades, like the claws of a beast, tore through the space around them. And Song Jinwoo, like lightning, pierced the defense. His strikes were fast and deadly, leaving no chance for salvation. Dust and debris swirled, engulfing the battlefield as if the earth itself could not withstand the titanic collision. In a mad dance of pain, Hwang Dong-soo arched again, letting out a silent scream that shook the very soul. The shadow dealt a crushing blow, piercing the enemy's body like an arrow fired from an ancient bow. Sharp shadow axes, like silent guards, sank into the ground, marking the end of this fierce confrontation. The battlefield was riddled with cracks, and every blow from Song Jinwoo left an indelible scar. One of the shadow blades, like a predatory symbol of a completed battle, froze, awaiting the next command from its master. Song Jinwoo lowered himself, his figure shrouded in a shimmering aura, completing the final, decisive act. At last, amid the ruins and dust, he stood, not just a victor, but the embodiment of absolute power over which nothing could do anything. The force slowly receded, leaving behind only a light steam, like that of overheated metal after long forging. His eyes glowed with a cold light, and the hand clutching the ancient weapon was a silent promise of further victories. Suddenly, Eugene-ho's voice, full of genuine admiration and faith, pierced the silence. "I never doubted your victory for a second." Song Jinwoo, satisfied, merely chuckled, his gaze as sharp as his blades, accepting the praise. After the battle ended, Seong Jinwoo, with his characteristic confidence, reached towards the screen to collect his well-deserved reward. The new skill that enveloped him in a blue glow was not just an ability, but a part of himself that did not require training. A cold calculation, mixed with satisfaction from his newfound strength, flickered in Song Jinwoo's blue eyes. His hand, now surrounded by a mysterious aura, acquired a sharpness ready for new achievements. Suddenly, a blade materialized in his hand, black and sinister, whispering of unfinished vengeance and great shame. A red haze thickened around him, and a voiceover spoke of human greed, which gives rise to endless chains. Song Jinwoo gripped the hilt of the blade, feeling its ancient power pulsing in response. The blade vibrated in his hand as if alive, its glow causing a silent question in the red void. "This is definitely not goblin trash," Seong Jinwoo thought with a slight grin, assessing the power of the new weapon. It was time to test his new skill, blessing, praises, and he braced himself for impact. A sharp swing, and the air around him shimmered, cut through by a flash of blue energy. His movements were quick and precise, each strike of the blade leaving a blue trail behind it. Rocks and debris flew into the air, shaken by waves of pure, concentrated force. The ground shook beneath his feet as Song Jinwoo brought his blade down, crushing everything in its path. At the site of its impact, only a jagged landscape, riddled with deep cracks, remained. Song Jinwoo chuckled, his eyes glowing with blue flames as the shadows of his loyal warriors danced around him. Nearby, Yu Jinho, sitting among the rubble, raised his head thoughtfully, taking in the destruction. His gaze fell on the prostrate Song Suho, and at that moment, Yu Jinho couldn't believe his eyes, his mind frantically trying to comprehend what had happened. He struggled to rise, only able to let out a low cry, shocked by the boundless power that Song Jinwoo had just displayed. On the distant bridge, crowds of people froze, watching the slowly disappearing portal, involuntarily sensing the presence of something grandiose. Yu Jinho, gritting his teeth in anxiety, could only manage to squeeze out a quiet agreement while Song Jinwoo prepared himself for the unknown. Before him yawned an abyss, a portal pulsing with pale light, drawing in the darkness and calling him to pass through the veil of reality. Without a second thought, Song Jinwoo stepped forward, his figure rushing into the shimmering whirlpool towards his destiny. Sweat trickled down Yu Jinho's temple, his gaze unable to tear itself away from the place where his friend had just disappeared, sensing something was wrong. There was confusion all around. The wounded hunters were recovering, and the rest were trying to comprehend what had happened, while an unknown threat was already waiting. And then, from the shadows, they burst forth, a pair of monstrous dogs with blazing eyes and bared fangs, harbingers of a new battle. Song Jinwoo charged at the first one with all his lightning power, cutting through the air with blue energy. His movements were graceful and deadly, each blow carrying destructive force, leaving only defeated enemies in his wake. Song Jinwoo stood over the body of the fallen beast, and his faithful shadow hovered next to him, ready for the next step. A sudden thought flashed through his mind, and he paused for a moment, gathering his strength. His gaze fell upon the majestic sword of pure mana, which now shimmered in the air like the embodiment of divine power. And then the shadow that followed him proclaimed that only fools dare to oppose those who are stronger than them. Song Jinwoo only turned away, his gaze thoughtfully lowered, the weight of the new challenge visible in his eyes. All around stretched a silent battlefield, strewn with fragments of magical ice, witnesses to the recent chaos. In the center of the ruins, beneath a blood-red sky, a shattered portal was visible, and along its edges lay the shadows of the fallen, a reminder of the cruelty of this world. Devastation reigned everywhere. Ice shards littered the ground, turning bloody hues against the backdrop of a stormy sunset. One of the hunters lay in blood, his armor was cracked, and he himself became just another victim of this merciless war. Song Jinwoo looked at him silently, his gaze cold and determined, leaving no room for doubt. Finally, he rose to his full height, and around him piled the bodies of defeated monsters, and the ghost faithful to him was already hovering nearby. The Shadow Blade itself, like the embodiment of rage, declared that anyone who dared to encroach on these lands would know only defeat. In his hand was a blade, piercing the darkness with a radiance as mysterious as the question hanging in the air. But the glow quickly turned to an ominous crimson hue, and Song Suho sharply ordered his invisible interlocutor to remain silent. With fierce determination, the blade plunged into the ground, leaving behind cracks that spread like a spiderweb. Dark shapes rose from the shattered earth, like ghosts of battles long past. Song Suho looked up, and a little ghost hovering nearby listened to his words about any creature that dared. His hand extended forward, and in this gesture there was an unspoken thought that foreshadowed something important. As if about to grasp something from nothingness, his fingers slowly clenched. Carrying the fallen with him, Sun Suho turned away from the blade, and the ghost, perplexed, asked why he did not call upon their shadows. A shadow of a smile flickered across Song Suho's face, foreshadowing a hidden plan or a ruthless decision. The blade stood unwavering, holding within itself the silent answer that the ghost tried to decipher. The ground beneath them still bore the scars of battle, evidence of the recent clash and crushing force. Exactly, Song Suho said shortly, looking forward as if he was discovering something important. His figure was bathed in a purple glow, as he declared that only in this way could his enemies be defeated. For he is the king of the dead, the lord of shadows, and his will is the law for the fallen. He spoke of the king of beasts, the lord of fangs, the leader of the plague, the lord of aggregate states, and the king of solids himself. The Demon King, who is called the Lord of the White Flame, the Giant King, known as the Lord of the Beginning, and the Yeti King, the Lord of Frost, all of them were also mentioned, as well as the King of Demon Spirits, the Lord of the Phantom World. But suddenly, his gaze turned wistful as a blue, ghostly hand appeared before him, awakening memories of his father. The blade, as if alive, spoke of how it was the Shadow Monarch who had killed its former master, the Lord of Fangs. A mortal threat hung in the air. If the blade's power were more stable, it would tear the Shadow Monarch's offspring to pieces. And his lifeless body, the blade warned, would be given to the wolves as a pitiful alms. But the blade itself spoke, as if conducting a silent dialogue, whispering of its ancient battles, so similar to his own. Shards of reality, colored by the glow of a magical storm, scattered around. But the blade itself seemed to interrupt its ominous command, struck by an unexpected turn of events. Its black blade, pulsating with blue light, seemed to reach out from the abyss itself. The Shadow Monarch's scion stood motionless, gazing at the deadly beauty of the ancient weapon. The sword, shrouded in a black aura and pierced by blue lightning, seemed to acquire a new, unknown power. A deep, unwavering concentration was reflected in Song Jinwoo's eyes, foreshadowing the inevitable outcome. His determination reached its limit. His hand reached out, confidently landing on the dark hilt of the blade. At that moment, the blade itself acknowledged its new master, proclaiming the inevitable union of shadow and fang. But the world could not remain in the grip of shadows forever. Now morning is pouring into the cafe, full of life. However, even here the echo of recent tragedies did not die down. The news of the complete destruction of the raid and the D-rank gate stirred minds. At the tables, amid the aroma of coffee and the light morning bustle, people tried to comprehend what had happened. Min Byung-gyu, with a slight grin and a cup in his hand, seemed ready to share his own special version of events. But even through the glasses, through the apparent calm, a light sweat appeared on his temple, revealing hidden tension. And on the screens flashed articles about a heroic E-rank hunter who not only survived, but also saved many lives. One of my colleagues, distracted from his paperwork, absent-mindedly suggested hiring a couple of porters. Panic in the collection teams grew, requiring the urgent recruitment of new, albeit low-ranking, hunters. Among them, one, staring intently at the screen, seemed particularly thoughtful. Yu Jinho, looking through the dossier, suddenly froze, surprised that the great hero was only E-rank. This discovery caused shock and bewilderment among everyone, while the one who was thoughtful only smiled mysteriously. Continuing to study the dossier, Yu Jinho saw personal information. The yellowed photograph captures a youth that holds incredible potential. It was something so unexpected that Yu Jinho's hand involuntarily clutched the phone. His companion, full of disbelief, assumed that an E-rank hunter should have happily accepted the guild's offer. But the reality turned out to be different. The refusal came like a bolt from the blue. The senior hunter's eyes showed complete incomprehension as to how this was possible. The younger one just threw up his hands, not knowing what to answer and only hoping for further contact. Meanwhile, Song Jinwoo was scrolling through the messages on his phone, deep in thought. Offers from guilds poured in one after another as soon as he left the last dungeon. They were all eager to get him, offering him roles as a collector or a carrier, which made him puzzle over the real reason for such a rush. The real reason was not his previous rating, but something much deeper. However, joining any guild threatened to become an obstacle to his unique growth. With a determined look, he made a final decision, discarding the idea. His gaze fell on the mysterious blade that rested nearby, wrapped in cloth. Slender fingers slowly unwound the bandages, revealing the ancient power that lurked within. The ruined arena appeared before him, and he wondered if his shadows were ready to fight side by side. His eyes, full of determination, reflected the cold gleam of the blade. Every curve of this deadly weapon seemed to be imbued with unearthly power. Only a shadow of slight thoughtfulness crossed his face, foreshadowing a battle. The blade, like a beacon in the void, stood tall among the ruins, awaiting its moment. San Jian Du sat, surrounded by his ghostly weapon and his faithful companion, immersed in a deep silence of anticipation. His consciousness caught a subtle ripple in the very fabric of reality. The gates to this refuge seemed to dissolve into nothingness. So, the place he was looking for was now not just a point on the map, but an independent spatial dungeon? Images of monsters with glowing red eyes, massive and scaly, flashed before my mind's eye, foreshadowing danger. A casual message to his aunt, a last touch of the ordinary before plunging into a world where only his power reigned. And so, Son Jinyuwa was already standing outside, a blade behind his back, and, in his eyes, a cold determination to enter the unknown. Night was falling over the mountains, hiding the peaks in a mystical blue that promised more than just a hike. Only a ghostly light filtered through the dense foliage, enveloping the landscape in a veil of mystery and silence. A massive barbed wire gate loomed before him, impenetrable as a ghostly fortress, but his spirit was unwavering. The little spirit companion confirmed this was here, a place where entry was officially forbidden, but for him it was just another test. The sign on the gate clearly stated, Mount Guanok territory, entry for Hyena Guild members only. The Hyena Guild, whose power, it turned out, extended even to control the spatial anomaly itself. The Shadow Servant glanced questioningly at the blade, as if asking about the plan that had already matured in the head of his lord. A hidden power began to awaken, pulsing faintly around Sanjai Wu, heralding the imminent emergence of his true nature. His eyes, like two glowing pools, flared with an icy blue flame, reflecting a power capable of crushing any obstacles. And now his hand, enveloped in shining blue energy, became the embodiment of concentrated will, ready to act. For the Shadow Lord, there were no hopeless situations, only opportunities to demonstrate his boundless power. The fist clenched, and in this movement one could feel not just physical power, but an energy capable of bending reality itself. In an instant, the surveillance camera, the silent guardian, exploded in a cascade of sparks under an invisible, crushing blow. San Jinwu stepped back, his gaze cold and calculating, no evidence, no clues, just a vanished obstacle in the way. Step by step, he moved forward, every rustle of leaves under his feet dissolving in the silence of the night. At the gates of the forgotten mansion, overgrown and gloomy, his gaze stopped, as if searching for an answer to an unspoken question. After all, it was here, as ancient prophecies whispered, that the very mysterious crack in our world was supposed to appear. From the mists of the sanctuary where it was born, through an interdimensional rift, the threads of fate stretched out and intertwined with the earth itself. Something colossal, ancient, was preparing to reveal itself, breaking out from the depths of the ether. Enormous stone claws seemed to be squeezing the universe itself, preparing to crush it. At that moment, San Jinwu only chuckled, a subtle smile of anticipation and unwavering will. Then the time had come to act, because there was no point in waiting. The calm before the storm was coming to an end. And then, from the depths of the shadows, the first of them burst forth, a monster with glowing red eyes, thirsty for blood. Behind him, others rose up, distorting space, their silhouettes ominously outlined against the shimmering forest. With sharp claws and fangs, they were the embodiment of a wild, primal rage, ready to tear apart everything in their path. It was Briga, with sharp claws, his roar piercing the air, filling the area with fear and tension. And next to him was the Black Shadow Rajan himself, a mighty leader whose presence made the earth tremble. The time had come to show his power, and from the earth, at the call of the ruler, his blade burst forth, shining with an unearthly light. San Jin Wu, his eyes blazing with an icy blue fire, made a gesture as if calling for death itself. He was no longer alone. His faithful shadow, colossal and silent, stood beside him, ready for battle. I've already figured out how I'm going to fight, he thought before he launched the first blow. To begin with, he unleashed the usual basic attacks, the very ones used in the most basic training to assess the enemy. But then, with each movement, his blows gained a new, ominous power, leaving behind a trail of pure energy. The acceleration, reinforced by the power of the ruler himself, turned him into an elusive whirlwind of destruction, crushing enemies. Song Jinwoo, with all his might, brought down his blade, leaving behind only a blurry trail of pure, pulsating energy. Shadows swirled around him, unleashing unpredictable attacks using a variety of ghostly weapons. Each strike of his sword cut through the air like a blade capable of slicing through reality itself, piercing through enemies with silent speed. A ghostly, glowing hand materialized from the shadows, ready to grasp something invisible, heralding a new manifestation of its power. This is my new way of fighting, Song Jinwoo declared, surrounded by a shimmering shadow, demonstrating the equipment that allows him to extract shadow warriors. Even Kai's devoted little shadow helper couldn't hide his admiration, exclaiming, "You are incredible, master." This power, inherited from the Shadow Lord himself, was evident in every movement of Song Jinwoo, in every curve of his ghostly blade. And the longer this battle lasted, the more enemies fell, the stronger he became, resurrecting the fallen into his army. Chaotic energy pulsed around him, swirling into vortices of light and shadow, preparing for new summonings. Thanks to my increased intelligence, I can now use up to 5 shadow fighters, he thought as he watched his army grow. But when Kaya tried to say something, Song Jinwoo abruptly cut him off. "Shut up." Night was gathering over the forest, and dark thunderclouds were swirling in the sky, giving the moment an ominous atmosphere. "It's here," Song Jinwoo said, his sharp gaze piercing the darkness, his trusty blade and Kai waiting silently beside him. Before him stretched a place where the gates leading to a mysterious sanctuary hidden from prying eyes were located. Crouching in the thicket, he carefully examined the area like a predator studying its prey, preparing for the decisive step. Several men were warming themselves by the fire, their relaxed postures concealing a possible threat, or simply indifference. After all, it's best to fight monsters during the daytime, Song Jinwoo thought, his thoughts far removed from the carefree guards. Suddenly, the gates swung open, and several armed men rolled out of the darkness, heavy containers illuminated by bright lights. There was a powerful jerk, and the truck's wheels kicked up dust, rushing away from the place where secrets were so carefully hidden. Song Jinwoo froze, his eyes flashing with surprise mixed with insight. Something had gone wrong. The tension grew like smoke from a fire around the shackled figures, whose faces expressed horror and despair. Innocence met with depravity, and the tears of the unfortunate victim seemed only amusement for the merciless executioner. In the shadows, next to the determined Song Jinwoo, the ominous shadow of Ki appeared, confirming his worst fears. Even the impassive Ki felt a chill of foreboding, his glowing eyes narrowing in sudden alarm. The ghostly glow of a blade materialized in the air, and for the first time in years, Kuei seemed to wonder, what kind of power is this? The blue blade crashed to the ground, breaking the silence of the forest, leaving behind a vibrating trail of primal power. In the firelight, the silhouette of a man in chains appeared, his story intertwined with legends of heroes and their inevitable sacrifice. In a moment of extreme despair, a protector appeared, whose embrace could shelter from the cruelty of the world, if only for a moment. The villain, who just a second ago was reveling in the suffering of others, was suddenly confronted with an invisible force, his self-confidence crumbling. The world around blurred into furious movement, leaving no time for reflection, only for an instinctive reaction. A cold, piercing light flashed in Song Jinwoo's eyes, reflecting his unwavering determination. A furious roar erupted from his chest, foreshadowing the storm that was about to descend upon his opponents. A swift strike from Song Jinwoo, shrouded in shadow, knocked down one of the kidnappers, demonstrating his indomitable strength. The precise blow reached its target, cutting off the complacency on the enemy's face and foreshadowing his imminent fall. Loyal guards emerged from the shadows, their ghostly silhouettes frozen, ready to rush into battle at the first call of their master. The remaining bandits stood frozen in horror as they watched their carefully planned operation crumble under the onslaught of an unknown force. Another powerful blow, and the enemy flew to the side, like a puppet without strings. Song Jinwoo turned around, his gaze filled with grim determination, but also with concern for the future. The enemies, who had been full of threat just a second ago, now cowered under his heavy gaze, realizing the hopelessness of their situation. The dilemma gnawed at him from the inside, breaking the guild rules versus the instinctive desire to protect the innocent. His gaze, bright as the stars in the night sky, reflected determination mixed with a subtle pain. and then the surrounding space was torn apart by a surge of frantic energy, foreshadowing an imminent storm. He towered over the fallen enemies, asking about those who had been kidnapped, about those who had dared to be thrown into the abyss of danger. Before him stood mighty fighters, one of whom, a formidable warrior with an axe, seemed to be the embodiment of wild strength. But their numbers and terrifying appearance could not break his spirit when he saw only inhumanity before him. The evil grin on the attacker's face only intensified the cold rage in his own heart. His movements were lightning fast, his blades flashing with blue light, reflecting the hail of deadly blows. He clenched his fist, concentrating on every blow, every breath of his opponent. The next moment, a powerful blow sent the enemies flying, scattering them across the battlefield like toys. The shockwave shook the ground, and one of them flew off and collapsed, leaving behind only a cloud of dust. He moved with the grace of a predator, each step carrying a threat and inevitability. The speed of his actions was so astonishing that only blue flashes managed to flash before his eyes. Sharp blades cut through the air, delivering precise, crushing blows from which there was no escape. The enemy collapsed, his lifeless body another testament to his undeniable strength. From the shadows, like the embodiment of the night itself, Kwei appeared, his muffled voice whispering the name of his prince. The enemies, still capable of thinking, could not believe it. Could it really be that the strength of their enemy had surpassed all conceivable limits? The battlefield was strewn with broken weapons and fallen bodies, silently testifying to the defeat. Even Son Jinwoo himself, looking at the results, realized how easy his victory was, which was alarming. Meanwhile, his shadows freed the captives, restoring their hope of salvation. Under the grateful gaze of those saved, Son Jinwoo only modestly confirmed his belonging to those called to protect. Under the tortured but now hopeful gazes of the captives, Son Jinwoo felt the weight of their suffering. His shadow sword, Son Dry, silently asked what drove the Hyena Guild to stoop to such vile kidnappings. But Son Jinwoo felt a different, deeply disturbing omen hanging in the air. The reason he had brought them here was waiting outside the walls of this gloomy building. The darkness beckoned, promising to reveal the dirty secrets that lurked within. With determination, he stepped deeper, and his shadows followed him, ready for any danger. But what he saw there struck him to the depths of his soul, a sight that would make anyone shudder. Before him lay the kidnapper's lair, strewn with empty cages and echoes of other people's suffering. Amidst the filthy cages and abandoned syringes, Son Jinwoo realized the full horror. It wasn't just people who were being held here. Even his shadow, Sson Suh, expressed undisguised anxiety, feeling the weight of what was happening. Behind the bars of one of the cages, right at his feet, lay something that made his heart clench with pain and anger. The small, tortured creature, tormented and abandoned to its fate, was barely breathing. Son Jinwoo realized that before him was not just a beast, but a small wolf cub, the heir of an ancient and powerful family. Rage burned in his gut as he saw this child suffer, and Son Dry only confirmed his feelings. This wolf cub was the last descendant of the Monarch of Fangs, who, after losing the war with the Shadow Monarch, was sent to a safe sanctuary. The only one who managed to escape after that fatal defeat now found himself in this damned trap. The irony was that the Fang Monarch himself did not want a new heir, so devastating were the losses. But even he wanted his line to continue, for at least one spark of life to remain, for at least someone to preserve his legacy. Now the wolf cub was in Son Jinwoo's arms, saved from its torment, and Soo watched this act of mercy with relief. And Son Jinwoo knew this small creature, even though it was from another world, was now under his boundless protection. Son Jinwoo discovered that his new ally, the wolf cub Gray, was in a pitiful state, beaten half to death. His eyes, flickering with blue flame, were blazing with rage. It was more than just concern for the beast. Damn it, who else dared to stay here? Echoed in his thoughts, foreshadowing a storm. But a sudden realization filled his gaze, calling him to let out a shocked, "Huh!" Kanidaru, a ferocious beast full of menace, appeared before him and uttered a mysterious word, Guild Gigni. "Do you know him?" asked Son Jinwoo, holding his sword at the ready, and Kanidaru replied with dark understanding, "I know about him." A wicked grin distorted the beast's face, revealing its sharp fangs and foreshadowing trouble. "Brokey, you couldn't have forgotten you were sent to protect your descendant, right?" Kanidaru growled, attacking Son Jinwoo with fiery fury. Meanwhile, the wolf cub Gray, with his wounded paw tied up, was still trembling with pain and fear. Kanidaru's face, distorted with anger and disgust, expressed his contempt for weakness. Son Jinwoo met the blow, sparks of power flying with each collision, repelling the onslaught. But Song Jinwoo's gaze still turned to gray, as if he wanted to say, "Don't be afraid, I will protect you." Kanadaru rushed forward, his eyes glowing red, anticipating victory. A crushing blow of claws fell on Song Jinwoo, but he was ready. A powerful blow shook the ground, raising clouds of dust and debris. The force of the collision was so great that the walls around shook, crumbling into pieces. However, from the very heart of destruction, Son Jinwoo burst forth, glowing with blue energy, ready to counterattack. There was a groan from Kanadaru. "My prince!" The beast was wounded, but not broken. The ceiling, pierced by the blow, revealed the sky as Kanadaru fled, leaving only a trail of destruction in his wake. All that remained on the ground were twisted fragments, evidence of the powerful blow that had struck the beast. Song Jinwoo collapsed to the ground, his breath coming out in heavy gasps, blood staining his lips, an echo of the blow that had pierced reality. Blood was streaming down his face, and a cold anger blazed in his eyes, drowning out even Beru's cries of alarm. The shadow of Beru, a faithful servant, sensed a sinister energy, whose true nature was finally revealed in all its monstrosity. Song Jinwoo's gaze, sharp and piercing, reflected a determination that even agony could not break. And so, amidst the ruins, the monstrous form in which Kandiar appeared in all his might triumphed over the broken blade, his eyes burning with an ominous fire. As if mockingly, Kandiar asked how, even deprived of his sanctuary, he was able to retain such colossal power. The wounded creature, a kidnapped wolf cub, emitted a red aura, testifying to the cruel law of nature. The weak become food for the strong. The bestial grin of Kandiar, full of sharp fangs, foreshadowed only one thing: a merciless slaughter and complete destruction. And this wolf cub, this optimal food source, stood before the monster, seemingly doomed to be devoured. In the bottomless maw of Kandiar, energy was born, ready to devour everything in its path, emitting an ominous scarlet glow. Kandiar revealed his monstrous secret. He fed on the blood of a wolf cub, which contained the ancient power of the Monarch. The monster's roar shook space itself, and its red eyes burned with an insane thirst for blood and power. But at that very moment, Song Jinwoo's hand, enveloped in blue light, clenched into a fist, ready to fight back. Every finger tensed, every muscle filled with unprecedented strength, preparing for the decisive, crushing blow. And then a powerful beam of blue energy pierced the darkness, crashing straight into Kandiar's chest, tearing apart his shadow flesh. Kandiar's body exploded into fragments of shadow, its shape distorted by the onslaught of this frantic power. It crumbled, its flesh and bones turning to nothing, disappearing in a whirlwind of destruction. And the wounded wolf cub, like a phoenix from the ashes, regained his form, healed and restored by the power of his true monarch. On the ground, amidst the rubble and destruction, the once broken blade began to shine, full of new, purified energy. Only a single red spark flickered in the desolate darkness, the last vestige of Kandiar's presence, a reminder of the battle that had just ended. Song Jinwoo, determined and unyielding, raised his sword, preparing for a new round of mortal combat. He felt a wave of rage radiating from his faithful companion, knowing that Fang thirsted for justice as much as he did. His eyes glowed with a cold, ghostly light, reflecting the boundless power that was bursting out, transforming him. Somewhere in the distance, Antares sensed it, the audacity that dared to challenge his absolute power, and his anger flared into a crimson flame. Any uninvited creature that dared to breathe in his presence would be destroyed, its soul burned to ashes. So he swore. Gray, the faithful wolf, trembled with hidden rage, and the shadow next to him whispered about the impossibility of staying away. His eyes reflected an ancient, bestial ferocity that foreshadowed an inevitable and brutal battle. Song Jinwoo's back seemed carved from stone, every muscle tense, every step a harbinger of a storm. And so he rushed forward, the blade cutting through the air, and Antares was already responding with a crushing blow, shaking the ground under his feet. Song Jinwoo only chuckled, knowing that he was about to face a cruel, elusive force worthy of the name Brokey the Hyena. Questions whirled through his head. How was the monster able to create a guild and kidnap people, and what connected all this with the mysterious Itarim? Antares advanced, his movements fast and deadly, but Song Jinwoo was prepared for any turn, dodging and biding his time. Suddenly, other, less powerful but no less determined warriors emerged from the shadows, ready to join the battle. Antares looked at them with a look full of contempt, but also with a bit of irritation at the sudden replenishment of the enemy's ranks. Song Jinwoo didn't hesitate. His strike was lightning fast, aimed straight at the heart of chaos, clenching his fist in a burst of strength. Antares's monstrous maw gaped open, revealing rows of razor-sharp fangs, heralding a devour. Crimson energy surged around him, every atom of his being screaming with raw, destructive power. There was no fear in Son Jinwoo's eyes, only a pure, concentrated will to win that reflected all his determination. The deadly claw of Antares slammed down, seeking to crush everything in its path. But Son Jianwu was adamant. He met the attack by calling upon a power capable of crushing even a colossus like Brokey. Son Jinwu, instead of dodging, rushed forward, his silhouette flashing crimson in response to the enemy's fury. With a deafening roar, the air split as their collision created an explosion of pure energy. His eyes burned with an icy blue flame, every muscle tensed in readiness to withstand the onslaught. Anger-filled Son Jinw, he could not forgive Antares for the senseless sacrifices made for his whim. The bestial grin of Antares was filled with a mad thirst for destruction, frantic and ancient. In response to his fury, Son Jinwu soared into attack, cutting through space with streams of shadow energy. The blade of his sword sank into the monster's flesh, creating cracks through which pure horror oozed. There was an unbending determination in Sonwe's eyes. He was ready to go to the end. With every blow, with every whirlwind, Son Jinwu sowed chaos, his smile a challenge to death itself. Antares' body shook with pain, torn apart by the onslaught of unprecedented force. The colossus collapsed, thrown back by a force that could only be compared to the wrath of the ancient gods. But Son Jinw showed no mercy. He was everywhere and nowhere, his attacks merging into one continuous deadly dance. Again and again he rained down blows, each of which could have crushed an entire mountain. Antares, once unshakable, was now crumbling, his power fading. A death roar, full of agony and despair, erupted from the split mouth. Somewhere in the distance, Siddharth Bakshin also did not hold back his rage, bringing down a stream of fire, as if the elements themselves were embodied in him. But even after such an onslaught, the very essence of the monster continued to exude primal rage, refusing to give in. And Son Jinwu completed his symphony of destruction, creating a whirlwind around himself that engulfed all living things. Blades of invisible force cut through the air, foreshadowing the final, crushing blow. And in this flurry of unbridled power, Son Jinwu struck the final chord of his will, asserting his superiority over the abyss itself. Blades of invisible force cut through the air, heralding the final, crushing blow. And in this barrage of unbridled power, Son Jinwu struck the final chord of his will, asserting his dominance over the abyss itself. The lightning strike, charged with unimaginable power, met with monstrous resistance. But the only response was a mocking roar from Kandiar, who spoke disparagingly of his capabilities. Without giving his opponent a chance, Son Jinwu launched a swift strike, slicing through the ancient beast's flesh. "This is not the end," he whispered silently, his eyes lighting up with an unearthly light. And then the flurry of attacks began, every movement a whirlwind of destruction crashing down on the enemy. The shining blades of his will pierced the air, leaving behind only fragments of shattered reality. Even the mighty Kandiar was stunned by the unprecedented power. But the hunter's silhouette only grew in grandeur, shrouded in a crimson glow. At that moment, the space around them distorted, exploding with a flash of primordial energy. The sky split as pure gold of power burst forth, blinding everything around. And from the monster's mouth burst the symbol of an ancient curse, foreshadowing imminent death. But his determination was unwavering, casting aside the very thought of defeat. However, even his legendary weapon, the Fong, could not withstand such an onslaught, shattering into pieces. Candy Arrow roared, contemptuously rejecting any bonds except the most brute force, laughing at the miserable life. Amidst the ruins and debris lay the shattered blade, a witness to the furious battle. Shocked, Son Jinwu cried out, realizing the loss of his trusty weapon. But this loss did not break him. It only ignited the flame of rage, and he rushed forward with renewed vigor. And at that moment, something ancient and powerful awakened in the depths of his soul. The thought of his father flashed through his mind, and it became a new source of unshakable, all-consuming strength. And in that moment, something ancient and powerful awakened within the depths of his soul. A thought of his father flashed through his mind, becoming a new source of unshakable, all-consuming power. His fist, engulfed in a shimmering glow, the harbinger of a new era, rose to strike. Son Jinwu unleashed his true power, and the world around him warped under the onslaught of unknown energy. The incredible blow shook reality, pitting his shadow against a monstrous threat recognized only as Young Lord. But even in this fierce battle, the most faithful weapon fails, shattering with a deafening crack. Its shards, pulsing with bloody light, refuse to fade, promising rebirth into something more formidable. The battlefield erupts into chaos, where every blow leaves jagged wounds in the very earth. Amidst dust and destruction, the faithful Gray falls, wounded, but his spirit is unbroken, merely hardened by pain. His eyes, filled with determination, blaze with a fierce will to win, promising swift and furious vengeance. In response, Song Jinwoo unleashes a barrage of blows on the enemy, each one filled with fury and despair. But the monstrous enemy, ancient and merciless, only roars, returning the blow with tripled, all-crushing force. At that moment, Gray, engulfed in the flames of transformation, rises once more, his thunderous howl shaking the air and the earth. He understands that this is the last thing he can do to protect, to avenge, to change the tide of battle. And so, the sword, shattered but reforged by will, gives up its final spark, igniting Gray with a fire of unimaginable power. The wolf transforms into a fiery beast, tearing through the enemy lines, leaving only ash and fear in its wake. Every step is a thunderclap, every movement a deadly flame, consuming everything in its path. The world around him dissolves into a fiery whirlwind, for the very speed of his fury surpasses all understanding. And Song Jin-woo, clenching his fists, feels something new awaken within him, more powerful than ever. And amid this raging destruction, he stands unwavering, for his will is now the new, formidable law of this world. Quotes, a whole, best title and this fillions of a canyonist taste ides, how why, access to the message, but is most even don, gun, and more, they decisions above, or, and known whiles, and steadies beyonds, whole intended, goal, even mind are a problems at their forms, place where weapons, and, or, and maybe simple miles and incess, pulling washing for time, but most unforing in many of the seasons, in a terminant buy-in and falls, curring, and process presence, on the brink of consciousness, Song Jinwoo fell to his knees, the world around him cracking like fragile glass. But even as blood streamed down his face and every breath was painful, his eyes blazed with the icy blue fire of indomitable will. The fist trembled, squeezing the air, trying to gather the last bits of strength that still flickered in the exhausted body. An ominous shadow loomed over him, surrounded by a pulsating red glow, and a voice full of contempt said, "Good endurance." The darkness thickened, and the monstrous creature revealed its true form, distorted by rage and bloodthirst. "Die!" came a deafening roar that pierced Song Jinwoo to the very bones, ordering him to surrender. He met the gaze of blazing red eyes, and before him appeared not just an enemy, but the embodiment of an ancient, primal horror. It was at that moment that something changed in Song Jinwoo's eyes. Something ancient and powerful awakened, enveloping him in a scarlet aura. The earth shook, yielding to incredible pressure, and shattered into millions of sharp fragments. Song Jinwoo rushed forward, his silhouette merging with the shadow, leaving behind only a bright, fiery trail. He looked down, and ominous shadows with sharp, shining edges began to emerge from the ground, obeying his silent command. One of them, like a predatory claw, burst out of the darkness, ready to grab and tear apart. It wasn't just Song Jinwoo who stood against the evil. The loyal Gray, shrouded in a golden glow, rushed into battle. His eyes burned with a wild, primal fire, and his bared fangs foreshadowed an immediate and merciless massacre. Song Jinwoo, with blood on his face and sweat running down his temples, looked ahead, his gaze focused and extremely intense. Gray, persistent and menacing, lowered his head, preparing for a new, deadly throw. Once again, a golden aura flared around the wolf as Gray, like an arrow fired from a bow, rushed forward, intensifying his attack. Once again, his wild grin and eyes full of rage promised that this time the enemy would not have a single chance. The full weight of the battle was once again reflected on Song Jinwoo's face, but the flame of indomitable will still burned deep in his eyes. Gray, like a shadow, moved swiftly towards the enemy, his powerful jaws ready to close in a final, decisive bite. The ancestor of the FANS, the mighty Rakn, stood in all his terrifying strength, his muscles suffused with darkness and ancient fury. Song Jinwoo, amazed, realized that the beast had absorbed the power of Raikon's fang itself. Incredible. A guess echoed in Gray's mind. Did that mean that Raikon's fang sacrificed himself to save his cub, leaving him his essence? Deep sadness and determination were reflected in the eyes of Gray, who accepted the terrible truth about the price of his power. Then, like the conductor of an invisible orchestra, Song Jin-woo made a decisive gesture, preparing for a new act of battle. At that moment, their wills merged into one. The flame in the eyes of Song Jin-woo and Gray burned with a single unfading light. However, through the mystical connection, the voice of Rakan himself broke through, addressing his descendant. "We lost the war against the Lord of Shadows. In the end, in this world, only the strongest survive," Rakan growled, his words laced with bitterness and fatalism. "We have much to lose if we lose this battle," echoed the warning, reflecting the severity of the trials to come. And the last instruction of Rakan, the testament of a departing warrior: "Be sure to become stronger for the future of the fangs." His sharp fangs, a symbol of ancient power, seemed to embody a furious will and final instructions. The young puppy, shaken by fear, sought protection by clinging to his mother, whose sacrifice had given him this chance. Tears rolled from his eyes and trembling ran through his entire body, his innocent soul confronted with the cruelty of the world. Meanwhile, Rakan himself, defeated, struggled in agony under the onslaught of mysterious shadows, his form distorted. He turned to Song Jinwoo with a challenge, or perhaps a plea. "So, what about you? Why don't you just kill me?" Rakan's torment reached its peak, his gaze begging for an end as the mysterious figure watched silently. The unknown entity in whose hands the young cub ended up assessed its potential. "This demonic beast is quite useful. It has quite good abilities." Rakan's agony continued, every cell of his being tensed in a final, desperate struggle against the inevitable. Its massive maw opened in a silent scream, spewing out the last of its dark energy before disappearing. And so, illuminated by light, the hovering fragment, the focus of all his power, remained in the air, awaiting its new owner. But before that fragment came, we were presented with the story of his painful transformation, captured in the cry of a small creature that shook the air with despair. From the depths of the shadows, under the gaze of terrifying observers, a sentence was pronounced, charging Brokey the hyena with a new, terrifying mission: to collect the living. The ominous words promised increased power, but brought with them only pain and a twisted curse that was sealed within him. The tiny creature, once innocent, now only sniffled, tears streaming down its face, mourning its lost essence. The golden pupil, wide open with horror, reflected all the darkness that had swallowed him, and only a soundless sob escaped from his chest. A voice from the shadows, distorted and mechanical, mockingly noted that his fate was contrary to his wishes, but left him no choice. These memories, like fragments of someone else's nightmare, suddenly pierced Song Jinwoo's consciousness, forcing him to wonder, could this really be the legacy of Fong himself? Before his mind's eye, the silhouettes of the true instigators appeared, those who had put terror into Broca's eyes, creatures directly connected to the mysterious Itarim. And so a predator from the shadows was born, its jaws gaping greedily, its eyes burning with a fury ready to devour the world. But even in these memories, a desperate cry rang out. Not enough strength to defeat him, an echo of a battle that seemed lost. Song Jinwoo's gaze widened, his pupils constricting as he realized the true depth of what had happened, suddenly penetrating the essence. Two realities merged, the predator from the past and his own newfound power that surged through him. With a deafening crack, light and energy burst out, illuminating the space with a blinding flame. And at that moment, his hand, shrouded in radiance, fell upon the enemy, carrying with it crushing power. The young lord was transformed before our eyes, each blow strengthening his spirit and body, forging something greater out of him. The fiery glow engulfed the monster, its body cracking, emitting cries of pain that no one could silence. Every cell of his monstrous form writhed in agony, and his eyes glowed red in death throes. A powerful blow threw him back, breaking through rocks and tearing apart the earth, leaving only ruins in its wake. The once fearsome monster, Brokey, was now barely able to stand on his feet, his face filled with shock and disbelief. And as the battle died down, only a flickering light remained in the air, like the last whisper of a bygone era. The energy that had been hidden until then now boiled in his veins, preparing for the decisive blow. His blue eyes pierced the veil of chaos, reflecting an unbending will and determination. A sudden blow shook the air, causing the space around it to warp. Brokey himself, consumed by an unknown force, questioned in horror, feeling his prey slipping away. The hero's body, as if freed from shackles, moved with weightless grace, acquiring a new, stunning lightness. Each of his thrusts was lightning tearing through the darkness, each blow an echo of inevitable fate. A powerful kick sent the monster flying into the air, enveloping the hero in a halo of shining valor. Brokey let out an inhuman scream as his flesh began to tear under the onslaught of pure force. But the hero did not retreat. His appearance became the embodiment of an unbreakable will, and deadly power played in his hands. The monster, in rage and agony, became distorted, its eyes burning with the promise of death. Another crushing blow crashed down on Brokey, sending him flying away in a whirlwind of light and shadow. Had his magical power really grown so much? Even the shadows around him seemed to have taken on new life. Enraged, Brokey couldn't understand what trick his opponent had pulled. He could only feel his powers crumbling. The monster launched a desperate counterattack, unleashing a barrage of blows that could tear apart reality itself. The fist of light clashed with the fist of darkness in a deafening clash, shaking the foundations of the world. But the hero was relentless. His blow from below upwards shattered the monster's defense into pieces. Brokey's body began to disintegrate, his inner essence shattering into countless fragments. A final, crushing uppercut sent the monster into oblivion, marking the end of its reign. The monster's last breath was reflected in his eyes. His defeat was final and undeniable. And here he stands in the middle of the battlefield, in the radiance of his power, ready to take on whatever fate has in store for him. But even in this chaos, one of his shadows watched carefully, preparing for a new order. The monster, still reeling from the blows, tried in a last flash of awareness to understand its fate. But there was no mercy. One of the shadows fell upon the enemy with furious speed, like lightning. Each strike was imbued with pure destructive power, crushing the enemy's defenses. And so, the monster flew away, crashing into the ground, scattering stones and sparks like a doll. In this whirlwind of battle, even the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end with concentration and the power released. A heavy sigh escaped his chest, testifying to the inhuman effort expended in this duel. Sun Jinwoo appeared like a ghost over the fallen enemy, and his faithful Gray stood beside him, ready for the finish. In its death throes, the monster's gaze clouded over, and only a fragment of thought escaped from it. It was the last thing he could express, a fading desire to become stronger, but it was too late. Without waiting for the final agony, Gray delivered the finishing blow, ending his suffering. The teeth, once a source of terror, were now merely evidence of a crushing defeat. And in the last moment of his fading consciousness, something important flashed by, like a fragment of a long-forgotten truth. But the time for revelations had long passed, and darkness had swallowed his last memories. At that moment, Song Jinwoo felt a surge of new strength, a confirmation of his path. He looked around with a dark majesty, feeling the whole world responding to his presence. His faithful Gray raised his head, letting out a triumphant howl that echoed across the ruined battlefield. There was a silent understanding between them, without words, but deep and lasting. It was all over. Only he and his shadows remained standing, absolute masters of this battle. And, with unwavering determination, Song Jinwoo turned to his shadow, Beru, ready for the next step. Song Jinwoo, with indescribable seriousness, recalls Beru's words about the strange energy felt from the defeated enemy. A moment ago, fragments of memories that didn't belong to him flashed through Song Jinwoo's mind. He understands that the actions of the enemies are directly related to the invasion of his world, and that the apostles of Itarim are already here on Earth. His gaze is piercing, and a bead of sweat appears on his forehead, revealing hidden anxiety. He asks his shadow again, confirming the terrifying guess, and receives an affirmative answer. A bright spark ignites in his mind, illuminating the path to a new, daring plan. And the little shadow seems ready to share any plan of its master, stretching out its shimmering paws. A surprised Yu Jin-ho couldn't believe his eyes as he watched another unusual ability emerge. Song Jinwoo only smiles slightly, not revealing all his cards, but his determination is unwavering. All around them lies only ruined land, a silent witness to the recent battle. The gray, faithful wolf looks around cautiously, catching subtle changes in the air. Song Jinwoo approaches Gray with an offer, inviting him to join a new journey. The wolf's eyes glow with understanding as he listens attentively to his master's every word. A barely noticeable smile plays on Song Jinwoo's face, full of anticipation of the upcoming events. Suddenly, Gray licked him affectionately, causing Song Jinwoo to let out a rare, genuine laugh. A powerful force gathers in his hand as he activates an ancient artifact that pulses with purple light. The air shakes with a flash of magic, opening a path into the unknown with a deafening crack. Together, they stand at the threshold of a new dimension, ready to step into the unknown. And nearby, a faithful shadow watches the preparations for the great journey, barely containing its own impatience. A harsh, alien world opens up before them, full of jagged rocks and gloomy urban landscapes, calling them to new challenges. Immersed in the darkness of the forest, they found themselves again in the Dungeon of Shadows, where the air was filled with mystery. His gaze slid over his faithful henchman, anticipating the upcoming trials with a slight smile. Faithful Gray, sensitive to his master's call, stood at attention in anticipation of battle, his instincts heightened. A commanding gesture stopped the wild roar, reminding him who was boss and forcing the beast to obey. A name was given, simple but appropriate, reflecting the essence of the new companion and his place in the army of shadows. The wolf accepted it, responding with a joyful grin, and it seemed as if the very darkness around him trembled with approval. The master granted the new ally territory, leaving him in charge of these shadowy lands. He asked Baru about Gray's food preferences while he was already preparing for the goblin hunt. A satisfied smile touched his lips, foreshadowing success and new trophies. Watching calmly from the branches, he was confident in the strength of Gray, who easily dealt with enemies. A swing, and the air split with the fury of the blow. A ferocious grin and fangs were bared, foreshadowing imminent reprisal. The unstoppable Gray pounced on his opponent, knocking him to the ground in the blink of an eye. "As nimble as the wind," he whispered before turning his attention to sorting the spoils of the battle. Relaxing, he thought about the oddities of quests, recalling vague details about the enemies and their nature. A scroll unfurled before him with a new quest, mysterious and promising great, but as yet unknown, rewards. Rising again, he looked around the forest thicket, feeling the growing hostility in the air. The revelation of a father who had defied the system itself made his heart clench. So, the system is preparing him for the role of Shadow Lord? No, the answer was clear, albeit ambiguous. In this world, there was only one single Shadow Lord, and his eyes glowed with unspoken wisdom. Deep in his mind, Son Jinwoo searched for answers, trying to unravel the true purpose of the system. Each new bit of information made his gaze become more serious, and a bead of sweat appeared on his forehead. Meanwhile, Faithful Gray was coping with his tasks, once again proving his shadow loyalty. Jinwoo just nodded in satisfaction, his barely noticeable smile saying a lot. But far more important was the information that his tiny shadow spy was supposed to bring. The conscript concentrated on collecting information, his eyes glowing with a mysterious blue light. And so, fragments of other people's memories, like shards of ice, began to flow towards him. The identity of the one behind the creation of the sinister Hyena Guild, and whose methods left only destruction in their wake, has been revealed. Seong Jinwoo's eyes narrowed, reflecting deep understanding and growing anxiety. A symbol appeared before his mind's eye, permeated with shadow and foreboding of the inevitable. To solve this mystery, they had to delve into the shadowy world of those in power, hidden behind the glittering facades of skyscrapers. But sometimes the answers come by themselves, interrupting the calm of everyday business. A hand reached out to the glowing screen, ready to accept a challenge that could change everything. On the other end of the line, Lim Tai-gyu, the head of a powerful guild, was having a difficult conversation. The glowing display of the phone reflected his tense face. He mockingly dismissed his opponent's words, suggesting they look for hyenas in the zoo, not realizing the true threat. But Lee Min-sung was not about to back down, directly expressing his dissatisfaction with Lim Tai-gui's arrogance. Vice President Lee Min-sun reminded that even in a world where the law is sometimes powerless, the association and its president possess a power that should not be underestimated. Lim Tai-gyu merely turned away from the screen, his indifference feigned. And after lights out, a scarlet fire flared in his eyes. A fire of rage at the one who, being only his driver, dared to commit such insolence, becoming an S-rank hunter whose ascension caused only rage and questions about the limits of power. Seong Jinwoo's mighty blow shook the earth, tearing it into pieces, as if reality itself could not withstand his growing strength. But very little was learned from the survivors, as if the story itself was resisting attempts to be revealed. A hand gently rested on his shoulder, and a voice whispered that now was not the time to waste energy on secondary goals. Lee Min-sung, the vice president of the Reaper Guild and an A-rank hunter, smiled so that his red eyes glowed with ominous anticipation. His silhouette was reflected inside the mysterious ball, and he kept telling himself that if this business was successful, no one would dare look down on him again. Meanwhile, somewhere else, a powerful blow ended the life of another monster, its body collapsing limply under someone's foot. The mighty gray wolf, surrounded by his fallen enemies, bared his fangs and let out a menacing roar, ready to tear apart anyone who dared to come close. Although Seong Jinwoo was puzzled by the system's name for his new henchman, Growler, he was pleased with his quick adaptation to the new reality. A sudden question froze in his eyes as something caught his attention, and then, looking up at his dark shadows, at the flying creature hovering in the air, he said, "Is that so?" His eyes widened in surprise as another system window appeared before him, heralding new challenges. Gray, his faithful guard, at that moment merely bared his fangs, his yellow eyes blazing predatorily, ready for any battle. Song Jinwoo let out a soft sigh and looked down at the golden window that had reappeared before him, becoming an integral part of his new life. Daily quest? Goblins again? He muttered discontentedly, reading the system's new instructions. As he and Gray climbed the sheer wall, the thought occurred to him that perhaps the system wanted this entire territory to become its own. In such a huge place, how will I find 100 goblins? Flashed through his mind before a sudden thought struck him. Inventory. He remembered his supplies, which could help him in this search. In his hands was an ancient horn, an item that could change the course of the battle. He raised the horn to his lips and let out a powerful sound that echoed throughout the forest, awakening something deep within the thicket. The forest froze in anticipation. Only the rustling of leaves echoed, foreshadowing the imminent appearance of new shadows. The sounds of footsteps multiplied in the darkness of the forest, foreshadowing the inevitable collision. The darkness, like a living wave, rushed forward, carrying away with it the old doubts and fears. But the hunter only grinned, confirming his suspicions that something more was coming. His fist clenched, gathering power, ready to burst forth in a destructive wave. And with that force he struck, cutting through the air and sending out a wave of pure destruction. His gaze burned with determination, and every movement spoke of an unyielding will. One by one, the opponents crumbled to dust under the onslaught of his invisible blows. The fury of battle was reflected in his eyes, foreshadowing a merciless end for all who dared to stand in his way. No creature could withstand this power, disintegrating into particles of light and shadow. He stood motionless as the last of his enemies fell around him, turning the battlefield into a silent picture. Even after such a fight, he felt only a slight disappointment, longing for a more serious test. And then, as if at his call, a new wave gushed from the depths of the forest, summoned by the ancient artifact. The roar of the goblins pierced the air, their greedy gazes directed at the single figure standing in the center. The forest itself seemed to come to life, releasing from its shadows a whole army of new monsters. A whole legion came into view, their eyes glowing with an ominous red fire in the pre-dawn darkness. The hunter turned, looking at the already defeated enemies before facing new crowds. His personal army of shadows had already gathered around him, ready to rush into battle at a single sign. A new battle ensued, with every shadow of the protagonist fighting with honed grace and deadly efficiency. Even the faithful Gray seemed tired, but his eyes still burned with determination. The third hour of the relentless hunt continued, and each defeated enemy only added fuel to the fire of his ambitions. The fight continued, and each blow Gray brought down with incredible force, leaving only defeated enemies in his wake. But amidst this chaos, Su-Ngin-Wu was lost in his thoughts, and his shadow companion seemed to read his unspoken desires. A slight smile played on the hunter's lips, foreshadowing a decision that was about to change the course of the coming battles. A sudden roar, full of despair and pain, caught their attention, breaking the brief respite. Before them stood the last of the leaders, the goblin centurion, whose rage was as great as his death cry. And then the system offered a reward, surprising even the seasoned Gray, who stared at the ghostly message with incomprehension. A wide smile blossomed on Jinwoo's face, a new level, new possibilities, and the anticipation of even greater power. He felt a surge of energy healing every wound, and he understood that this reward could be decisive at the most dangerous moment. But there remained one more secret, one final test that required his full attention and concentration. Leaning under the shade of the ancient trees, Song Jinwoo pondered the contents of the cursed random box, knowing that it would grant exactly what was needed most. A bead of sweat trickled down his temple, as the price of a mistake could have been too high. And then, from the light, ancient gauntlets burst forth, so powerful and majestic that Song Jinwoo could not contain his surprise. He will no longer rely only on shadow blades, because now he has his own, true weapon, worthy of a great hunter. Like ancient rocks clad in armor, the gauntlets awaited their owner to unleash crushing force upon their enemies. Their weight was noticeable, but it only strengthened his will, and Song Jinwoo decided to channel all his spare points into strength to become even more invincible. With a victorious grin, clad in new power, he felt how not only he himself was changing, but also those who followed him. But his surprise knew no bounds when he looked at the strange little animal frozen at his feet, and even its shadow expressed bewilderment. New challenges awaited him beyond the portal, where the Reaper's Guild was already plotting, and Song Jinwoo was ready to meet them face to face. With a determined look, he stepped forward, leaving old battles behind to begin a new chapter in his incredible story. But the world was not at peace. An urgent message from Suho's assistant interrupted his thoughts, calling for immediate action. The abandoned station, broken glass, and eerie silence testify to the fact that even the safest places can become gateways to the unknown. Debris crumbled underfoot, and every step echoed in the deserted space, reminding us of the fragility of the human world in the face of a new threat. Amidst this chaos, Suho appeared, his voice sounding unexpectedly cheerful, as if he didn't notice the destruction around him, sincerely thanking them for their help. He revealed that no one else had dared to answer the call, leaving Song Jinwoo perplexed by the strange situation. Suho was convinced that everyone else was simply conspiring to avoid work while Yu Jinho, with his usual calm, offered his support. "My savior!" Suho exclaimed, handing him the protective suit, secretly hoping that he would be the one to fix their hopeless situation. Memories of past adventures, where Suho treated the wounded Gray while Song Jin-woo fought bravely, flashed through his mind, highlighting their inseparable connection. For a moment, Song Jin-woo's familiar hoodie lay on the bench, a symbol of his everyday life that he was once again forced to put aside. Now, clad in a protective suit, he looked ahead with a serious face, preparing himself for the unknown that awaited him beyond the gates. A group of hunters appeared before them, their looks full of skepticism and discontent, hinting at past disagreements and tensions. One of them, his face distorted with anger, accused Suho of violating the agreement, demanding an explanation. Suho, trying to smooth things over, assured them of his complete readiness and asked them to trust them no matter what. He admitted that he is not the team's leader, placing all his hope on Song Jinwoo and his unique summoning abilities. Song Jinwoo, understanding the full weight of the responsibility placed upon him, only silently clenched his jaw, accepting the challenge. They moved forward, the group of hunters, now more determined, stepping into the ominous darkness where red beams of energy foreshadowed danger. "Careful, it's slippery in here," Suho warned as they walked deeper into the ruined corridors, where the floor was covered in a sticky substance. The powerful energy emanating from the deep darkness became more and more intense, as if the space itself was groaning with the approaching evil. Inside, the ruins pulsed with red light, and vile tendrils clung to the walls, turning the once ordinary building into a lair of nightmares. Every flicker of red light, every twist of those living vines on the floor heightened the sense of impending danger. And then, from the very depths, a furious roar erupted, shaking the air and foreshadowing the appearance of something possessing destructive power. A desperate cry rang out from nothingness as the bony figure dissolved into streams of blue energy, heralding the coming of something ancient and powerful. His dragon's mouth opened in a silent roar, and his scarlet eyes glowed with an ominous light in the blue of the mystical aura. Another shadow stood frozen nearby, its slit eyes also glowing red, silently watching the absorption process. But suddenly, space exploded with fire, and the echo of a powerful blow rushed through the dimensions. Two silhouettes, shrouded in flame and shadow, prepared to fight back against the unknown force that was awakening around them. An invisible blow sent one of the warriors flying backwards, his body pierced by pulsating blue energy that threatened to tear him apart. The battle raged in all its fury, fiery balls met icy shards, and blades clanged in the fight with the monsters. Meanwhile, monstrous lizards crawled out of the shadows, their red eyes glowing with predatory hunger, their scaly bodies writhing in anticipation. Yu Jinho, standing in the middle of the chaos, looked anxiously at the two figures in protective suits. They looked at each other in bewilderment, whispering about lizard monsters, because according to their information, the cursed volcano box was supposed to summon demonic creatures. Yu Jinho watched the squad's well-coordinated tactics with concentration, assessing every move and teamwork. Clutching the key, shimmering with an otherworldly light, Yu Jinho recalled the countless corpses of goblins and centurions left in his wake. But his thoughts were interrupted by an ominous command coming from a figure in a protective suit, surrounded by a swirling purple shadow. The next moment, hordes of terrifying creatures rose from the darkness, their eyes glowing with a maddened light, their weapons thirsting for blood. One of the lizards let out a piercing scream, its long tongue sticking out of its mouth, foreshadowing a deadly attack. When the last enemy seemed to have fallen, Yu Jinho confidently declared that this place was finished. However, Yu Jinho's gaze slid over the walls, as if sensing something more. A sudden feeling of unease ran down Yu Jinho's back, and a bead of sweat rolled down his temple, foreshadowing trouble. Yu Jinho turned around abruptly, his eyes widening in shock. The monsters that seemed to have been defeated had risen again, and the suited guards were whispering in confusion about the unbelievable. And while Yu Jinho was preparing for a new, seemingly endless battle, one of the guards only confusedly confirmed, "Yes, what?" not understanding the scale of the newly emerged threat. A powerful energy pulsed, tearing through the air around with a furious force. But this power was not under control, and its owner seemed to be writhing in agony, barely containing the growing power. A desperate cry echoed through the dilapidated corridors, informing the captain of new, serious problems. The man in the protective suit turned around, his gaze fixed on his interlocutor, and the question about the body sounded like a harbinger of new trouble. And before them appeared a terrifying sight. A body, distorted by pain and blue energy, lay on the cold slabs, seemingly ready to rise again. The fighters' gazes converged on this dead man. His accessories made it clear that he was an ordinary civilian, mercilessly transformed into something else. One of them started talking about the corpse, and the second one seemed to already know the rest, only nodding gloomily in confirmation. Meanwhile, far from the unfolding tragedy, someone's focused gaze pierced the darkness, watching the growing chaos. They spoke of the origin of the darkness, of new monsters blazing with blue fire, and confirmed that something similar had already happened at Hankook University of Arts. And, pointing to new destruction, the fighter barely stated that the curse haunts them here too. The captain's head was spinning from the realization of the scale of what was happening. Lifeless bodies lay around, and everything was repeating itself. He looked at his men in their protective suits, feeling the weight of responsibility for their every move on his shoulders. The silence was tense. Everyone was considering their next move, and unspoken questions hung in the air. The thoughts under his helmet were full of horror. How could he want to go further under such circumstances? But the captain was adamant, his voice firm, asserting his right to decide what to do. He then turned to one of his own, asking a strange but important question about his running skill, which was met with a confused response. In that single glance, one could read all the bitterness of foreboding, stern determination, and unspoken farewell. The order was simple and terrible. If the situation repeated itself like last time, flee immediately. A dark, stormy sky hung over the ruined buildings, reflecting the inner gloom and hopelessness. And as if in response to their words, a guttural, chilling scream came from the depths of the ruins, accompanied by flashes of blue energy. Their screams rent the air as blue energy warped their bodies, drawing something unimaginable from them. In the ominous hall, watched by shadows, helpless victims burned with blue flames, fueling the unholy ritual. Meanwhile, from the depths of the lair came the deep voice of Candiar, dissatisfied with the scarcity of resources and asking for new supplies. Braycan, shrouded in darkness, reported the failures, offering to find that person to solve this critical problem. From the depths of Candiar's being came a commanding roar, "Replenish, urgently." RAM, imperious and menacing, asked about the reasons for the difficulties with a certain hyena who had previously provided them with the necessary drops. Anxiety hung over the ruined walls, as without enough stardust, their advantage was rapidly eroding. Suddenly, something caught the ancient monster's attention, causing him to freeze in tension, sensing a change. A sense of presence above pierced the air. "Hunters?" came a predatory whisper. "They're just in time. We need more fuel." The one called the third received orders to go up, with the condition that he deliver the offering alive, for the call of his comrades was ready. In response to the command, the figure drew its blade, dissolving into the shadows, preparing to meet the intruders in a bloody dance. Meanwhile, deep within the ruined complex, the hunters clashed with the vile creatures, their blades whistling in battle. A green glow of healing magic enveloped the wounded warrior, restoring his strength to continue the fight. Son Suk-H, with a sly grin, suggested using what he had hidden for a special occasion, seeing the team's cohesion. A mysterious artifact appeared in his hand, shimmering with magical light, like a promise of unprecedented possibilities. The surprised comrades inquired about the origin of the rare item, learning that its power, although great, was limited to only a week. The same sly grin appeared on Sunskok's face again, full of confidence in his decision. The small, blue glowing ball in his palm pulsed like a heart ready to release its power. At that same moment, inside the dungeon, Candiar felt a sharp surge of energy. His eyes flashed with an ominous red fire. Son Suk-H looked up, clutching the artifact, ready for the decisive step, while the shadow of the awakened monster thickened above him. From the shadows, sharp steel burst forth, shrouded in an ominous glow, a harbinger of imminent reprisal. The unfortunate man is thrown back by a powerful blow, his face contorted in terror and blood gushing from his broken nose as an invisible enemy demands to be captured alive. In the mad whirlwind of battle, C.A. Candiars unleashes his blows, crushing the earth and air around him, leaving no chance for escape. The other adventurers' eyes widen in shock as they realize the true power of this ruthless predator. One movement, and Candiar's blade is already piercing the body of a victim, another one who has fallen under his fury. All around there are only ruins, silent witnesses to the merciless battle that unfolded within these ancient walls. From the gloom, the blade reappears, pausing for a moment before unleashing its power in one deadly blow. Despite the terror, the squad of hunters grips their weapons tightly, preparing to confront the looming threat, even if the chances are slim. Meanwhile, Candy Ryu lifts the shining sphere, and in his hands it begins to emit a mysterious light. This is not just an artifact, but something living, pulsating with incredible power, capable of changing the course of a battle. Their faces express confusion and horror as they watch the monster prepare to absorb this shining essence. The sinister maw of Candyar opens, revealing sharp fangs ready to devour the power hidden within the sphere. And then the call to attack is heard as the hunters rush down, trying to stop the monster. The blade cuts through the air, leaving behind only a shimmering trail and a premonition of an inevitable collision. Blood splatters in all directions as Candyar mercilessly deals with one of the fighters, piercing his defense. Suddenly, a fiery explosion erupts, shaking the dungeon and blinding everyone with its fury. One of the hunters only manages to scream in horror as he sees the flaming blade approaching him. Another explosion follows, even more powerful, turning stone and flesh to dust, wreaking havoc all around. Red flashes cut through the darkness, and desperate cries for help fill the air, foreshadowing imminent death. Desperate cries of "Monster!" echo through the walls as the last hope leaves the hearts of the doomed. Bloody traces sprinkle the dark vaults, foreshadowing new victims. And now, in the midst of this chaos, a figure appears whose shadow dances with death. Broken blades and scarlet blood are all that remain of those who dared to stand in the way. A desperate cry of horror bursts from a wounded throat, dissolving into silence. But for Song Jinwoo, the battle was just beginning as the mysterious system panel appeared before his eyes again. He clenches his teeth and catches every word, every symbol hidden in this strange message. The task stood out clearly against the dark void, demanding immediate action. His gaze pierced the essence, and his determination became harder than steel. A new task has emerged, leaving no doubt someone or something has dragged the man into the depths of a nightmare. The panel flickered, telling of the kidnapping, and each letter seemed like a harbinger of disaster. Yu Jinho asks in horror how Seong Jinwoo could have known about the disappearance, to which he only shrugs, intuition. What? Wait, Yu Jinho exclaims, seeing the shadows enveloping him. You're leaving me here? A mixture of fear and bewilderment crosses his face as the reality of what is happening hits him. And in this silence he understands that there is no way back. I don't belong here, Yu Jinho decides. I'll ask the association for help as soon as I get out. And around Song Jinwoo, blue flashes are already dancing, gathering together the power of darkness. From the depths of his shadow, a roar erupts, the harbinger of one called to serve. His appearance changes, taking on the features of an invincible warrior whose strength is capable of crushing everything. Every step Song Jinwoo takes echoes with power, shaking the very foundation of this cursed place. And so, with a thunderous cry, he steps forward towards his new goal. Its movement is a whirlwind of destruction, rushing towards an unknown threat. The path is strewn with traces of ancient battles, every corner whispers of pain and failure. The reflections in the shards of the door show only darkness and inevitability. The floor beneath our feet is woven with living shadows, imbued with echoes of a life long gone, and even the air here hums with tension, echoing with invisible entities. A fallen warrior lies among the rubble, his strength drained away and his gaze fixed on the void. New victims have fallen to the unknown evil, and Rakan looms large over them, oozing menace. The mysterious Rakan notes his opponent's speed with undisguised contempt, calling him Little One. Against the backdrop of a colossal shadow, he declares victory, while the fallen warrior lies motionless behind him. The face of the fallen man is distorted with despair and pain as Kureisha looks at him with indifference. Behind Rakan hang captive souls, their energy fueling the sinister rituals that Kureisha calls replenishing the firewood. A sphere of pure energy pulses in his hands, and he contemplates ways to harness its power. A skeleton stands frozen beside him like a guard, and Rakan's thoughts flow about the flame that can pacify chaos. To the side, with a bestial fury in his eyes, Gray waits for his moment, faithful in his ferocity. These entities, corrupted by darkness, howl in their agony, their souls twisted and bound into bondage. Even Gray feels this pain. His eyes glow with the reflection of other people's suffering. But through the pulsing chaos, Sun Jinwoo is approaching, and even Gray can feel it. 3 grim guards, among whom the mighty Ram stands out, are preparing for battle. A massive gate, shrouded in darkness and power, rises before him, hiding unknown horrors. The floor stretches into infinity, dotted with cracks and reflections of alien magic, leading to a fateful meeting. An unstoppable onslaught breaks through space. Every step is a lightning strike. The earth groans under its power, splitting with every movement. And here they are, the spawn of the abyss, emerging through the chaos, preparing for battle. Koreshi's honed movements leave a deadly trail behind them, foreshadowing the coming clash. His gaze pierces the darkness. It contains the determination of a hero standing on the edge of the abyss. The blue flame in his eyes flares up, lighting the way to the battle for survival. Demons appear before him, the very creatures that bring destruction. The prisoners hang on chains of blue magic, their lives barely flickering in an alien dimension. But the spark of hope has not died out. He sees the people are still alive, their salvation is possible. The demon beast Candy Ryu rushes forward, its fury tearing through the air. Kureisha parries the blow, his body a whirlwind of speed and power. Candy Ryu, frozen for a moment, feels that in front of him is not just a victim. There is an accusation in his voice. "Are you guilty of the death of those who fell in my path?" Kureshi's response was a flash of blades cutting through the darkness and air. A powerful blow shakes the space, aimed straight at the enemy's heart. Hidden figures watch, realizing that his power has exceeded all expectations. But they, too, are not asleep, striking back with ruthless precision. Candy Ryu's gaze burns with furious malice. He gathers his ancient power. The clash of two titans tears apart reality, each blow an explosion of energy. And at the center of this deadly dance is Kureisha, unwavering, his eyes burning with the determination to win. The mighty AMMUT unleashes his wrath, his shadow looming over the battlefield heralding destruction. But Kureisha is thrown aside like a toy, the earth itself trembling from the force of the blow. Yet, despite everything, he rises, the blade of the dagger gleaming in his hand, ready for another thrust. In the whirlpool of attack, Kureisha demonstrates inhuman speed, masterfully avoiding deadly attacks. His eyes burn with blue flames, and pure, pulsating energy erupts from his palms, ready to explode. With this energy, he crushes his opponents, each blow bringing inevitable destruction. The shadows crumble under his onslaught, their shapes distorted by pain, dissolving into nothingness. And again, a powerful block, reflecting the blow that threatened to tear him to pieces. But Kureisha stands firm. An explosion of purple energy illuminates the battlefield, casting dark silhouettes in a chaotic dance. The heavens open, and a new enemy, ancient and powerful, dives headlong towards Kureisha. An army of demons, full of fury, surrounds him, their hungry howls piercing the air, frozen with tension. At this moment, Kureisha encounters Rakan, whose shadow hides its true, deadly power. But his attack is lightning fast, piercing space, leaving only a blurry trace of pure force. The shadow sweeps through enemies, leaving behind only chaos and destruction, as inevitable as death itself. Even the great AMMU seems to recognize this power, feeling a familiar resonance piercing his ancient essence. After all, before him is an echo of the very power that belongs to the Lord of Shadows, a force capable of conquering entire worlds. Another blow shakes the earth, echoing through the shattered ruins, shaking reality itself. Although he is weaker than the Overlord, his will is unwavering, and a legion of shadows is relentless and loyal to him to the end. At the center of the storm stands Kureisha, surrounded by an aura of pure power, unshakable as a rock. Every step he takes is a statement of strength, every breath a promise of inevitable victory. In the shadow of the gathering storm, amidst the lightning bolts, new facets of threat emerge, foreshadowing the test to come. But Kureisha, with a piercing gaze, is already calculating every move, knowing that the combined strength of these opponents could be fatal. Somewhere in the distance, in the dim light, a dark messenger reports of a fallen enemy, whose memories have been extracted but whose body remains intact. Ho listens thoughtfully, his eyes reflecting understanding and concern. He begins to realize the true purpose of this strange order. He bends over Gray's body, his gaze full of concern. What happened to his faithful companion, and why is his state so lifeless? A heavy exhalation, full of pain and rage, escapes from the chest of the mighty wolf, his grimace distorted with suffering. Meanwhile, from the swirling darkness, a powerful, almost tangible force materializes, squeezing something invisible, preparing to strike. And so, another silent warrior steps onto the field, his silhouette imbued with blue flame. He's ready to rush into battle as soon as the order comes. The enemy's body lies motionless, not completely fallen, holding secrets and potential, awaiting its new destiny. Suddenly, a blinding wave of blue energy pierces the space, tearing apart the silence and shaking reality itself with its grandeur. A swift rush, pure power embodied in movement, rushes through the air, leaving only a blurry echo in its wake. The impact shakes the earth, splitting it into thousands of sharp fragments, each of which carries an echo of this crushing force. The energy spreads out in waves, weaving into vortices and patterns that slowly melt into the surrounding darkness. In the chaos, one of the shadow warriors rises into the sky, or falls with devastating grace, its silhouette outlined by a shining halo. The battlefield becomes a kaleidoscope of shadows and light, where giant beasts and humanoid figures clash in a merciless fight. A furious roar pierces the air as one of the monsters contorts in agony, its silhouette blurred by some unknown force. But Kuresha remains unperturbed, his calm only emphasizing the power of the enormous shadow beast standing behind him. A deadly blade or claw pierces the target, leaving no doubt of its intent and ruthlessness. Meanwhile, from the depths of oblivion, an ancient masked figure emerges, its eyes glowing red, heralding a new threat. And a dark hand reaches out from the darkness, asking a question that echoes across the shattered world. Could those who crushed? Is it really those who crushed? The hero counts his strength, preparing for the coming clash, when even the shadows find a voice. But one of the most faithful, Beirut, reminds us of his presence. His devotion knows no bounds. The protagonist's eyes flash with an icy blue fire, reflecting a determination that surpasses human. And the power descends upon the battlefield as he calls for battle, his shadow growing to colossal proportions. The impact shakes reality, bringing the heavens down to earth, and every fragment of power echoes with destruction. Streams of energy collide, creating vortices of light and darkness, harbingers of imminent catastrophe. But in response to the blue onslaught, a scarlet flame flares up like an ancient curse, ready to consume everything. Lightning bolts of red anger pierce the air, tearing apart space, and each discharge brings death. A crimson glow covers the horizon, heralding the coming of true destruction. And amidst this chaos, someone's foot steps on the charred ground, each step a harbinger of an inevitable fate. Explosions of energy tear through the landscape, and fragments of the universe fly apart from their collision. From the flames and ashes rises a majestic figure, its pointed ears pierced by a crimson glow. Every impulse of power is reflected in the very heart of the world, causing a new wave of destruction. Her silhouette, shrouded in a crimson glow, foreshadows a new round of despair. But even under unimaginable pressure, the opponent, whose face is distorted with anger, only clenches his jaws tighter, feeding himself with blood magic. Titans clash, shadow against flame, each blow tearing apart space. Speed and fury embodied in a deadly dance as two powerful creatures meet in combat. A mighty blow shakes the ether, leaving behind only a roar and distorted air. Each fist carries the energy of destruction, and their collision creates scars on the very fabric of reality. A furious roar erupts from the shadows, heralding the arrival of Ammut, whose gaze pierces the darkness. A warrior bursts into this chaos like a lightning strike, wondering how the ghostly soldiers dared to appear here. But in the depths of those eyes shining with a blue flame, there lies not just bewilderment, but the awakening of true power, ready to respond. Two colossi clash, their blows sending sparks from the very ground, tearing apart the space around them. A shadow palm, spewing purple lightning, prepares for a crushing blow, embodying pure, primal rage. Son Jin-woo grits his teeth, realizing that this intervention is only delaying the inevitable, but his resolve is unwavering. In a brief lull, Rakan warns that the fusion cannot last forever, and that every swing of Circa's sword drains the last of her strength. Then the faithful shadows, Jaamrmu, descend upon the battlefield, their fangs and claws ready to tear apart anyone who dares to stand in their way. And so, gracefully striding across the battlefield, Circa, the embodiment of valor, prepares for the decisive throw, and behind her, the silhouette of Rakan looms ominously. He steps forward, his words ringing out like a death sentence. "I'll ask just one question," foreshadowing the inevitable confrontation. His eyes, burning with an unearthly light, pierce the veil of silence, seeking the answer that holds the fate of the worlds. And the question hanging in the air was simple and terrible in its directness. Where is Son Jin-woo now? Circa, in all her valor, froze, her determined face twisted in sudden realization, her blade trembling in her tense hands. Even the shadows around Rakan, who serve him eternally, involuntarily recoiled from the strength of his will, but he himself remained unshakable. That voice was all that escaped her lips, a whisper filled with ancient fear and deep, unforgiven resentment as a dark omen hovers overhead. And then Circa, who seemed invulnerable, shuddered from an unknown blow, and a silent cry of pain distorted her face. This was only the first chord of the symphony of destruction that began with that very whisper. Even her comrades froze in bewilderment, their faces distorted with anxiety and questions about what kind of unknown force could have struck the formidable Circa in such a way. While they were wondering about the nature of this attack, new threats materialized in the shadows, silhouettes of demonic lords, whose ominous aura suggested that they had not simply appeared, but had been waiting for this moment for a long time, recognizing each other by ancient omens. But even in the face of such power and the pain she had just endured, Circa only broke into a mad, ecstatic smile, as if dancing on the brink of death was the highest pleasure for her, anticipating the continuation of the battle that promised to become legend. A decisive order was given to first deal with the newly arrived enemies, causing Circa to scream in surprise, not believing what she had heard. At that moment, as if the darkness itself had taken on flesh, a gigantic gray surged forward under the command of a dark silhouette, tearing the air apart with a whirlwind of destruction. San Bo, feeling the echoes of ancient powers, looked at Cirque with concern, wondering if she could withstand this onslaught in her current state, as far as her special abilities would allow. Mighty Iron, a loyal warrior of shadows, rushed into the fray like a whirlwind, his ghostly sword flaring hungrily in anticipation of battle. But Circa, seasoned in 1,000 battles, did not waver, clutching her ancient spear, her resolve stronger than steel. And in W's eyes a cold, piercing light flashed, a sign of absolute concentration and inexorable will. The earth shook from the powerful blow, the air sparkled, and a fiery hell erupted over the battlefield. Circa, thrown back by the blast wave, barely held back a scream, but even as she fell, she did not give up, clinging to her last strength. San Jinwoo and his faithful shadow watched this furious dance on the brink of death, their eyes filled with both concern and respect. And the small shadow soldier seemed to have completely lost control, desperately trying to dodge the attacks that rained down on him. Circa, now lying helplessly on the ground, struggled to articulate the words about the dire circumstances that had brought her to such a desperate situation. Meanwhile, the brave Chaaein, like a goddess of war, single-handedly faced off against a horde of demonic creatures, her movements swift and deadly. Sanji Inwoo, observing the enemy's cunning tactics, whispered indignantly, "How petty and vile." And among the Dark Lords of Shadows, R.A. Kan spoke the name of Isol Raideru with disdain, seeing in her survival only a new opportunity for his harvest. And then Sog Jinwoo, hovering above the battlefield, declared with cold confidence that he had an answer to their daring maneuvers, an offer they could not refuse. In response, the mighty Baru clenched his fist, and a crimson aura flared around him, foreshadowing a crushing retribution. A swift, merciless blow fell upon the target, shaking the earth and sky, leaving only destruction in its wake. Circa, once again at the epicenter of deadly energy, literally flared with a scarlet glow of pain, but her spirit remained unbending. Her scream rent the air, filled with agony, and the flickering system notification only confirmed that she was on the brink. But even as she bled, Circa, with a mad, ecstatic smile, rushed back into the fight, her scream merging with the sounds of battle, while San Jinwoo and his shadow watched in amazement at this display of indomitable will. At that moment, Keirisha, whose eyes burned with a blue flame, weighed someone else's life on the scales of his own strategy, admitting to himself that deep down he felt sorry for her. But the battle did not forgive weakness, and a piercing energy blow rushed forward, cutting through the air. Keirisha himself, surrounded by a ghostly aura, clashed in a lightning-fast duel with a mysterious opponent, sparks of purple magic flying around. A voice from the shadows rumbled, demanding the blood of a noble demon, as if an ancient ritual were calling out to its victim. But Circa, with a bloody eye patch, was not about to give up. Her furious roar tore through the air, colored with a crimson glow. Her mad red eyes reflected not only pain, but also a frantic thirst for battle, as if a fire had flared up in her very soul. The beast's grin revealed sharp fangs, and a new cry, full of primal rage, escaped her lips. With her spear at the ready, she rushed back into the thick of the battle, becoming a whirlwind of destruction, furious and reckless. Meanwhile, Keirisha dealt blow after blow, his foot crashing into the ground with force, scattering fragments of stones. As if dancing with death, he parried and attacked with two blades, each thrust a flash of pure energy. Finally, he came face to face with his shadow, tearing apart space with powerful blows that shook the very dimension. In response to the challenge, the shadow, its eyes glowing with red flames, rose up, enveloped in a whirlwind of destructive energy. Her silent roar shook the air, and her silhouette distorted in a furious dance of blue flames, foreshadowing the imminent blow. Kurisha retreated, dodging the crushing attack of the shadow, which seemed to tear apart space itself. But the next second, the shadow collapsed, its power dissipated, and the blade fell with a ringing sound onto the slabs, marking the end of this duel. Irsha, now calm and collected, turned around, and his look, full of cold determination, clearly said, "I have dealt with this." His hand, radiating a crimson glow, was ready for new trials, for new battles. Meanwhile, Circa, engulfed in flames of rage, unleashed a hail of blows on the mysterious monarch who stood before her in a mask. Her predatory grin and burning eyes indicated that even on the brink of death she would not retreat. Through pain and fatigue, Circa continued to fight, ignoring the system message warning of her critical condition. The sudden blow was met by an impenetrable shield, which repelled the onslaught and caused amazement to appear on the attacking shadow's face. But behind that shadow lurked the true power of Keiureshi, his eyes glowing red, and he was ready to unleash his fury. The world shook from a powerful blow that shook the very space around it. A giant AMMUT, its heart glowed with an ominous red light, radiating a threat that made the blood run cold. The relentless onslaught continued, each blow of the gigantic monster splitting the air. AMMU's bestial grin, filled with ancient rage, foreshadowed only one thing: complete destruction. AMMUT looked down on the fallen with disdain, calling them useless nothings, unworthy of his attention. But his opponent did not give up, declaring that he had another way to bring down this giant. The unexpected counterattack made the Shadow Commander hesitate, piercing the ground right in front of him. AMMU'd unleashed a new barrage of blows on him, leaving no chance, putting his bloody fury into each one. In the distance, Circa appeared with long purple hair, her presence adding intrigue to the unfolding battle. And so, a firm tread that crushed the earth marked the determination of his opponent to stand to the end. Amidst the chaos, a menacing question rang out from AMMUT as his opponent launched a new attack. While AMMUT continued to rage, Kuresha, with burning eyes, announced that they too were ready to take part in this confrontation. Blue lightning pierced AMMUT, his wild roar echoing across the battlefield, signaling the blow dealt. Clenching his jaws, AMMUT gathered the last of his strength, his body glowing with energy, preparing for a new, furious response. But even in this chaos, the price of the battle was high. Circa lay wounded, her face reflecting unbearable pain. Rising with difficulty, Circa addressed Beru, admitting that the battle had been excessive and expressing surprise that someone other than Song Jin-woo himself was capable of commanding shadows. Even Beru, usually silent, seemed puzzled, not knowing the answer to her profound question. And then, finally, her gaze was filled with absolute shock, the realization that this could not be true. From the very depths of the shadows, as if spawned by her unspoken horror, a ghostly wolf materialized, its light illuminating only the ruins. But only when her gaze, full of madness, focused on the figure of Son Jinwoo holding the innocent child, she whispered, barely audible, "It's him." Son Jinwoo seemed to be lost in thought, his face remaining calm despite the chaos around him. Then, with a slight but commanding gesture, he raised his hand, pointing to something invisible but tangible. Isol Reiteru, frozen on her knees, watched from afar as So-en Jinwoo, who seemed to be communicating with the strange shadow creature, appeared. He stood like a monument, his silence a question hanging in the air, demanding an immediate answer. But suddenly his gaze caught something unexpected. A powerful shadow silhouette appeared before him, clutching something important in its clawed paws. With a bitter, almost mad smile, Isol Reiteru whispered that the changes were so great that she hardly recognized the old man in him. At that moment, her heart sank with a strange sense of déjà vu, and the words came out of her mouth, "How similar he is to Mr. Son Jin-woo." Beneath the shattered vaults, amidst shadows and debris, Sanjay in view, gray, and the mysterious silhouette stood as Isol Reiteru watched in mute horror. Sanjay in W, with a barely noticeable sadness, bent over the exhausted Isol Reiteru, realizing that the burden of power had been too great and she had lost consciousness. Not only she, but the rest of the warriors were defeated, their bodies exhausted and their spirits on the verge of collapse, paying the price of this battle. Sanjay Yu towered over the fallen, his silhouette the only solid point amidst the chaos and powerlessness, like a guardian of the dead. On his face there was a subtle but undeniable smile of a winner who knows his own strength. With a slight gesture, full of determination, he spoke words that were meant to be reassuring but sounded like a sentence. "I saved all 7. Suddenly, a genuine, shocked expression appeared on Son Jinwoo's face. as if he had seen something unimaginable. And at that very moment, the space around him exploded with invisible energy, reflecting the internal resonance. Before his eyes appeared a system, beckoning with its treasures, as if promising unprecedented power and new opportunities. And at that moment, a deep, almost forgotten feeling overwhelmed him, similar to what he experienced in childhood, receiving a reward for a fulfilled promise. Finally, that same predatory and confident smile, promising new battles and new victories, played on his lips again. With a slightly arrogant smile, Song Wu looked at the system reports that unfolded before him, knowing that the world had changed again. But his gaze fell on the wounded Isol Raidaru, in whose eyes one could read only bewilderment in the face of imminent death. And then a scarlet elixir materialized in the hunter's hand, whose shine could restore life. Ignoring all the arguments of the system, Song Wu decided on an unheard-of gesture, ready to give the precious potion to the captive. Slowly, drop by drop, the life-giving moisture flowed down the lips of Isol Raidaru, driving away the shadow of death. The light of healing enveloped her, but the voice of the system questioned her insane expenditure on saving someone else's life. However, Song Jinwoo was already giving orders to his faithful Burge, instructing him to gather the fallen demons, as new shadows were always needed. Shadows danced in the air, swirling into a summoning vortex ready to engulf the fallen. And from the chaos of battle, new shadows rose, powerful and silent, to swell the Shadow Monarch's army. Even the little shadow, a silent witness to great events, seemed to understand the significance of the moment. A heavy blade, still warm from the recent carnage, rested in Temiso's GW's hand, foreshadowing new achievements. In the depths of the mysterious dungeon, two figures were waiting for him, suspended on chains, their bodies pierced by electric agony. Their suffering was obvious, but Jinwoo only coldly noted that this painful retribution was inevitable. With a decisive movement, with one swing, he ended their suffering and their existence. The world around shook, marking the end of another chapter. A ringing silence replaced the roar of battle, leaving only destruction. Meanwhile, far beyond this realm of shadows, the world still felt the echoes of great upheavals. Officials and hunters in Seoul discussed the aftermath, trying to comprehend the scale of the recent destruction. Were there other creatures there besides monsters? They asked, anticipating even more terrible discoveries. And in conversations full of anxiety, the name Sondson came up, a simple student who found himself in the very center of events that no one even suspected. The name Sondracesmsen now echoed through the corridors of power. The official's gaze was full of mistrust and hidden fears. Even Jae-sun D-Rai himself felt like just a pawn in this game, not fully understanding the scale of what was happening. But mentors and colleagues, like the mysterious hunter who looks on now, felt that something had changed irrevocably. He reminded people of their loyalty to the rules, as if trying to maintain a fragile order in a world where everything was falling apart. The furious order to search every inch of this dungeon betrayed desperation and a desire to find answers, no matter the cost. Deep down, Sondrys knew that there was more to his salvation than just luck. His gaze, directed towards the sky, sought not only the sun, but also the truth hidden behind the veil of secrecy. The truth was merciless. The world around was turning into ruins, engulfed by ghostly plants and eternal darkness. Every surviving wall whispered stories of decline, of a battle humanity was losing. Amidst this chaos, with worry in her eyes, appeared Circa, an alien from another dimension whose fate was closely intertwined with this world. She told of the unknown young ruler, of the seal that held the ancient powers, and of the mission placed on her fragile shoulders. Jomkals tried to put together the scattered pieces of the puzzle, recognizing inner Essel, whose name only vaguely flickered in his memory. Her answer was clear. Yes, we met in your training, and these words only raised more questions. Why were the memories of the very beginning of his journey so blurry, as if someone had erased them? The puzzle became more and more complex, and his mind refused to accept the obvious. But there was no time to think. The ghosts of the past and present merged, and important decisions required immediate action. A sudden revelation struck him like lightning, revealing a long-forgotten truth. Rage flared in his eyes as he realized the monstrous deception. This weakness was only a mask hiding true strength. And under the powerful gaze of the shadows, the true essence of Circa Squat was revealed in all its tragedy and inevitability. With sadness in her voice, Si Circa told the young lord that he should know about the fall of the Demon King and the death of the aristocratic bloodlines at the hands of Son Jinwook. Long decades of calm passed in peaceful grace, until about 6 months ago when disaster struck, upsetting the fragile balance. In his mind, like an echo of forgotten battles, the name of a new horror surfaced: Stardust, an amplifier of magical power that had engulfed the demons. He vaguely remembered the whispers of that threat amid the roar of battle as the demons tried to devour the blood of the aristocrats. Under the influence of Stardust and the absence of the Shadow Lord, the demonic clans, led by the monstrous AMMUTS, began to unite, forging new, sinister alliances. Their goal was clear. They rebelled against the Radier family, who had always been under the protection of the Shadow Lord. The sky blazed with magic. The earth shook with fury as countless legions of demons descended upon the once impenetrable walls. Armies, clad in armor and armed with spears, advanced, their tread auguring only destruction and oblivion. For 6 long months, the Radier family held their ground, but even the resilience of their greatest warriors could not withstand the inexorable tide, and eventually they fell. But the victorious demons were not satisfied with just victory. They thirsted for blood, the blood of purebred aristocrats of Radier, in order to gain immeasurable power for themselves. Death took everyone, even her father, and drained her of her strength, turning her into a fragile vessel, devoid of her former greatness. Bitterness and self-flagellation were evident in every word. I am so insignificant. Everyone died, but I remained alive. Tears mixed with the pain of loss froze in her eyes, reflecting the deep wound in her soul. Sam Jin Woo stared at her silently, his mind analyzing every word he heard, every manifestation of her despair. A glimmer of determination flashed in his eyes, hinting at a nascent plan that could change the course of events. The decision was made. As if raising an unbreakable oath to the heavens, he promised to help the Raider family take first place in the brutal hierarchical struggle of the demonic clans. Suddenly, an ancient tablet appeared before him, emitting a mysterious glow, as if opening the way to unknown secrets. And then the Circa smiled broadly. Her previous sadness was replaced by excitement, because she knew that she had found an ally of unprecedented power. Thus, beneath the cover of ancient ruins, Son Jinwook and Circa met, their destinies intertwined as they prepare for a new chapter where shadow and light will clash in a battle for power. Sangji Jinwoo was startled, his gaze frozen in shock at the new power that had awakened before him. And then Isil Raidaru, whom he had just met as Irecake, looked up, her eyes filled with trepidation, calling him young lord. The system message confirmed that she, the last of the pure-blooded demon aristocrats, was expressing her gratitude to him, and Shang Jingwu realized that her situation was even more unique than he had imagined. A barely noticeable, satisfied smile touched Somg In Wu's lips, marking the beginning of a new stage. But Isil Raidaru's was confused, because a mysterious window also appeared before her, as if reality itself responded to her presence. Song In-woo nodded affirmatively, his shadow silently watching, and the words about the prince and consent hung in the air. Realization dawned in her eyes. She, a descendant of the Lord of the White Flame, was destined to become his ally. Outside, in the ruined city, the three of them stood, Son Jinwook, Isil Raidaruk, and the mighty Jenvik, preparing for their next move. Song Jinwoo suggested they try out their new ability, his fist clenched in anticipation as Isil Raidaru looked at him with undisguised worry. And so, a white flame flared up, enveloping Isil Raidaru, as if an ancient ritual had begun its performance. Her body was transformed, surrounded by red and black energy, the power of which was almost unbearable. And this was only the beginning. A blood-red aura flowed from her clenched fist, pulsating like a living heart. Song Jingwu flinched, feeling an unseen power pierce through him, his eyes widening in surprise. With a loud thud, Cecil Raidarus collapsed to the ground, her body engulfed in flames and her eyes filled with shock at the loss. Exhausted, she could barely breathe, her energy draining away, leaving only emptiness. But Song Ji-Zion-woo felt the power flowing into him, his hand glowing red, preparing to demonstrate. The lying Isil Raidaru realized that she had given her power to the young lord, becoming a part of his greatness. And then Quarter-round Wumforce Indi-woo unleashed his punch, pure, concentrated energy erupting from his fist, shaking the air. The ground beneath him cracked and shattered, evidence of the destructive power that was now at his disposal. Jinjian Wu and his shadow froze, their faces filled with silent amazement as they witnessed the birth of something truly great. Sin Jinwoo felt that this connection was different from anything he had known before. Something about it was different, deeper. Circa looked at Gray in bewilderment, realizing that the energy she had given had only produced a partial result. San Jinwoo wondered if it was because the charge was insufficient and it was preventing the full power from being released. The system confirmed that the skill, Demon Strikes, had been activated, but its potential remained locked. San Jinwoo, looking at the shadow he had created, wondered what exactly had been given to him. With sudden determination, he extended his hand as if trying to grasp something invisible. And, as always, his voice sounded authoritative, calling the dead to a new existence. However, the body of the mighty demon remained motionless. His soul did not yield to the call of the Lord. Even his shadow servant understood that some souls were too corrupted to be subjugated. San Jinwoo accepted this, and with a generous gesture gave the useless shadows to Circa, who was delighted. As she accepted the potion from Son Jinwoo's hands, Circa expressed her doubts, feeling more like a burden. But her words were cut off when Circa saw his smile, as if it had thawed from the ice. That smile, rare and sincere, dispelled her worries, filling the space with light. However, their attention was drawn to a strange sound coming from the destroyed building. The little shadow spirit twitched, babbling something fearfully about a prince, as if sensing trouble. Son Jinwoo, suddenly wary, narrowed his eyes, trying to understand the reason for this strange behavior. His gaze turned to the ruined building, from which came a growing roar, foreshadowing something grand. And now, from the depths of darkness, a new silhouette appeared, menacing and full of ancient power. Son Jinwoo, Circa, and even the faithful Gray froze, watching the appearance of the powerful being. It was something unprecedented, a shadow colossus in which one could sense not only strength but also age-old wisdom. The shadow spoke, its voice echoing with ancient knowledge, telling of the true nature of stardust and origin of mist. It was a shocking revelation. The stardust had spread not only in the demon world, but its source was a monster from another dimension. This source of mist, taking the form of a colossal shadow, inspired terror with its power and unnatural radiance. His enormous hand, as if woven from the abyss itself, seemed ready to fall upon all that exists. But that was only one aspect of the threat. Stardust was produced not only here, but in countless other places, filling the world with it. Among these shadows, eerie images flickered, in whose eyes a predatory red spark burned. Behind all of this was the Reapers Guild, a mysterious organization that supplied people to the Stardust Factory. Their minions, like ghosts of the night, mercilessly collected their living tribute. And at the center of this diabolical scheme is the factory itself, where this damned stardust was forged from human souls. But the true puppet master behind the rebirths, the factory, and the source was Iterum. San Jinwoo's face turned stony. Every bit of this information echoed with icy pain. The full weight of the revealed truth was reflected in his eyes, but his steely determination did not waver. Once again, images of this ruthless machine appeared before him, the threat of which hung over the entire world. Every shadow, every reaper, every demon is just a tool in Iterum's monstrous game. Even those who seemed to be the embodiment of order could only be puppets in the hands of this ancient force. The specter of death, forever following their victims, was only one link in this sinister chain. Meanwhile, the world beyond the walls of this revelation continued to live its life, but tension hung in the air. Reporters, hungry for a sensation, crowded at the entrance, anticipating something incredible. Then steps, confident, unhurried, came from behind the glowing threshold. And so he appeared before them, C.E. Chu Jong-in, the embodiment of charisma and power, whose appearance always foreshadowed important events. Amidst the flashing cameras and the insistent hum, a voice cut through the crowd, demanding answers about the hunters. Like a rock in a stormy sea, Choi Jung-in calmly announced the end of the investigation, not hiding his indifference to the accusations. However, the crowd did not calm down, its cries mixing accusations of kidnappings and terrible news about those who had fallen in the field dungeon. The eyes of one of the subordinates, trembling with tension, reflected the entire burden of responsibility and shame that fell on their guild. He whispered that this field dungeon in Seoul was under their direct control. The faces of ordinary citizens were distorted with disbelief and shock, trying to comprehend the scale of what had happened. On the verge of despair, he lamented the casualties that could have been avoided if not for something that had been missed. From a bird's eye view, the scene was a whirlwind of emotions surrounding Chu Jung-in, the center of an unspoken storm. Rumors swirled in the air, mingling with official statements, until someone asked doubtfully, had the Reapers Guild always served the people? Meanwhile, Chu Jung-in gave the world his signature chilling grin, and a sinister glint flashed in the depths of his eyes. For him, it was just another game in a difficult game, and he, as an experienced actor, knew with a sense of superiority that he was still in good shape. One matter had been settled, but the Hunters Association remained a thorny issue, and Chu Chanin gave orders to his men with cold confidence. In the distance, in the shadow of his own thoughts, Limtae Gyu sat in a chair, his hands folded in concentration, and a melody was barely audible on his lips. Chu Chanin, deep in thought, squinted slightly as he studied the invisible chessboards of the future. His subordinates silently watched the towering structure, which hid their true intentions from prying eyes. Meanwhile, Son Jinwoo seemed to step out of the shadows, his gaze fixed on something off-screen that caught his attention. Son Jinfu approached Baru, asking if he had sensed anything that could be connected to Itarim, but there was no answer, only emptiness. In response to the silent question, one of Choi Chong-in's confidants nodded briefly and affirmatively. Chu Jong-in's face hardened, his gaze became sharp as a blade, foreshadowing the decisive action to come. And Son Il-Hwain, with a face tormented by the mystery, said in deep thought, "We will soon know everything." Son Jin-woo looked down thoughtfully, watching one of his ghostly warriors, whose form now seemed almost vulnerable. But through the cracks of reality, as if in a broken mirror, echoes of battles appeared, where powerful entities fought with furious force. Even the shadows, usually unwavering, seemed alarmed, their invisible hearts beating in anticipation of great danger. In the depths of Son Ji-Yun-woo's eyes, blazing with bloody fire, rage, and an unwavering determination to respond to any challenge boiled. He looked around the deserted streets, where every stone seemed to hold its breath before the unknown. "No, nothing," he whispered, but there was a hidden anxiety in his voice that even the faithful Yu Jinho could not calm.